Good morning and welcome to the hybrid virtual and in-person meeting of the Policy Committee of the Hillsborough Transportation Planning Organization, TPO. One of the first times I think I've said that. So, this meeting may be viewed on Hillsborough Television, HTV, by visiting Spectrum 637 Frontier 22 or live stream from Hillsborough County's live YouTube channel or the county's website live meeting link. And also found in the county newsroom. And we will start now with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we'll start, I was trying to find out before, but do we know, we have public comment opportunities at this meeting. To speak during the meeting, no later than 30 minutes before, you can sign up at here, this is the link, or 813-758-0371, and provide the phone number. Do we have anybody signed up? I know I asked Ms. Alden before the meeting, but we weren't certain.
Cheryl, do we have someone?
Not for the policy committee.
Okay, not for this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. With that, you can sign up, and comments may also be given 5 p.m. the day before the meeting, and we can bring those. And we also have that opportunity coming this morning at the regular monthly meeting of the Transportation Planning Organization, the Hillsborough TPO. But right now we will do a roll call of committee members. If we could have a roll call.
Commissioner Kemp?
Here.
Commissioner Cohen? Here. Commissioner Overman?
Here.
Commissioner Smith?
Here.
Charles Klug?
Here.
Joe Wagoner?
Here.
Councilman Maniscalco?
Here.
We also have board members, Mayor Ross and Commissioner Overman.
Smith.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Smith.
Okay. So
I did say present when you called me.
That's right. Commissioner Smith is a member of the committee. We also open up this meeting to any of the board members who'd like to participate, since we do kind of a deep dive into topics that they may be interested in. So we're very pleased to have Mayor Ross and Commissioner Overman join us as well this morning.
And I think for me, the Transportation Improvement Program update that happens once a year is always, and for the community, I think one of the most important meetings of the year and a real focus. So we're going to do an unusual thing in terms of really looking at this closely so people have a real sense of what is going on. And we have changed procedures over the years that I've been here, the 4 years, to have these kind of pre-screened by everyone who submits anything, including the county and HART, and that, I think we've really changed and improved the process greatly. So with that, we will move to a discussion, and I'll turn it over to the Transportation Improvement Update, the preliminary draft with Mr. Johnny Wong of the TPO staff.
Thank you, Commissioner Kemp. Cheryl, can you pull up my slides, please? So, good morning, Policy Committee first. Johnny Wong, TPO staff, that's the first time that I've said that. And this morning I'm bringing you a preliminary draft of the Transportation Improvement Program. Commissioner, like you mentioned, we made a strong effort this year to get the update completed ahead of time to give our committees at least 2 opportunities to review the priority list and the TIP so that they don't feel rushed to give us feedback because typically they only have a very short window of time to offer feedback before we have to roll right into the process of approving the document. Next slide, please. So I provided this update for members of the Technical Advisory Committee and Citizens Advisory Committee to demystify the process of the TIP. What we have found through engaging with our committee members is that even folks who have been through this process a number of times are still a little bit confused about what happens, in what order, and what the purpose is. And so I've broken down this presentation into 3 sections. The first one is the longest because it's going to pay a lot of attention to the processes and the timeline and explain how we prioritize projects. And then the second section will go over some of the major highlights and updates to the TIP and to the priority list this year. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. This year, the TIP is getting a major overhaul. It's getting a major refresh. The format will look different. The layout will look different. So even folks who have done this a number of times should gain something from this presentation, and I'll kind of like direct you to the important pieces of the TIP. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, thanks. So the TIP is a plan that has 5 years worth of transportation projects in it. The 5 years worth of projects are the first 5 years of our long-range plan. The long-range plan shown on the left of this screen is a 20 or 25-year vision. And because we're space limited, we can't list all of the details of all of the projects that jurisdictions across the county will take on in a 25-year period. It's just an overwhelming amount of information. So whereas the long-range plan is purposefully left a little bit general and a little bit broad, the TIP, or Transportation Improvement Program, has an opportunity to provide a lot more detail. So when you're looking at the projects listed in the TIP, you will see information like how the projects are funded, suggested funding types, cost, a far more accurate corridor or boundaries of the project, and specifically what type of benefits we see or we hope to achieve with each of these projects. Next slide, please. The TIP, like the LRTP, is one of the TPO's main responsibilities. And in the state of Florida, the TIP has to contain 5 years worth of projects, and it has to be updated each year. That's not necessarily the case with some other states. There are, of course, a ton of federal and state requirements that apply to the TIP, but some of the main ones are that it has to be consistent with the long-range plan. It has to be developed in coordination with Fdot and HART. It has to include regionally significant projects. It has to include projects that are seeking funding or will be funded with dollars from the Federal Highway Administration or the Federal Transit Administration. It has to be cost feasible, meaning it's not a wish list. These are actual projects that will get completed. And finally, it has to be created with public input. So we spend a lot of effort seeking feedback from our committees and from the general public on what projects they like and what they do not like. Next slide, please. In essence, the TIP is just a lot of lists of projects, and each list serves a different purpose. So in years past, we have referred to the 3 lists as tables 1, 2, and 3. For consistency, we're keeping that nomenclature the same. Next slide, please. So I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail and explain what purpose each of these tables or lists serve. Table 1 is a list of projects that have already been elevated to the status of priorities, meaning projects on this list are, we believe, going to address an urgent need in the community, whether that's infrastructure need or safety, congestion, mobility, or something else. We have already vetted these projects, and we believe that they will make a significant positive impact. And also, another criteria for being on table 1 is that the project already has or will receive money for construction. And we have been told by our Fdot partners that projects should remain on this list until construction is totally complete. So you may see projects on Table 1 that are underway, and they need to remain on Table 1 until construction is totally wrapped up. Because that shows our federal reviewers and our state reviewers that the community still supports these projects. Next slide, please. Table 2 is really the meat and potatoes of each year's TIP update. We spend a lot of time and effort developing this list, Table 2. Table 2 is composed of projects that have been submitted to us by the jurisdictions, meaning our agency partners, the 3 cities, Hillsborough County, Hart, Port Tampa Bay, Airport, T-BARDA, the list goes on. Any of those entities can submit a list of projects to us that they believe are priorities. If the jurisdiction believes that the project will address an urgent community need, we take a look at each one of those projects and evaluate it. And if the data show that it will have a significant impact on one of our goal areas, then we add it to the list. And based on how it ranks according to the data that we have, they get prioritized in order from most significant impact to lesser impact. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail later because that's a little bit of a complicated process. Next slide, please. And then Table 3 is a catch-all. Table 3 is really long because it includes projects that are listed in the FDOT work program, projects that have been requested from other jurisdictions for us to do planning studies, and also some projects that don't neatly fit into any of our investment programs. Also, as a courtesy to the general public, we list projects in each of the jurisdictions' capital improvements program. We do that mostly for convenience because if someone wants to know what's going on in the county, they can just refer to the TIP and all the information is in one place. But another purpose it serves of including all these projects is to ensure that there's sufficient coordination. We don't want 2 jurisdictions to be engaged in projects at the same time that may not be compatible. Next slide, please. All right, so I said I'm going to come back to it. Table 2, once again, this is a really heavy lift in updating the TIP each year. And so I'll start from the very beginning once again. Sometime in early February, late January, early February, we have a sit down with each of the jurisdictions. We meet with them privately and we go over the list of priority projects from the previous year. At that time, they tell us if the projects from last year are still priorities, like if they want to move them forward. If a project is no longer a priority, we'll take it off. And at the culmination of that meeting, they give us a list of projects that they feel belong on Table 2. So once we have that prospective list, we take a look at each project and what purpose we believe it will serve, and we drop it into one of our 5 investment programs. These icons to the right of the screen should look somewhat familiar. These are icons signifying our 5 investment programs, and from top to bottom, the red is state of good repair. A lot of infrastructure and maintenance projects fit into that category. Right underneath that in orange is Vision Zero, so safety projects go in there. Beneath that, the purple is smart cities. The emphasis in smart cities is reliability and congestion reduction. A lot of intersection improvement projects go in there. The blue is multimodal, otherwise known as real choices when not driving. So transit projects, bike, ped, trails and side paths go in there. And then at the very bottom are the major projects. Any capacity additions like widening projects, high dollar projects, or major transit projects that can move a lot of people can be dropped into that category. It has a special designation because there are some particular rules about what projects can get dropped in there. All right, so we have a list of projects submitted to us by the jurisdictions. We rank them into one of our investment programs. From there, we try to find the most relevant data We will look to see how a project will, how a project will perform if it were to be constructed. And based on that evaluation, we rank projects within each of those 5 categories according to which will have the most impact all the way down to the least impactful. Next slide, please. Table 2 is a list of priorities that are unfunded but seeking funding. When you're looking at Table 2, there are a couple things that you should take note of because they're pretty good resources. The first is the column that I've circled in red. This is the suggested funding type. So once we have a project that is ranked on the priority list, we will identify some sources of funds that we believe apply to the project based on its type, based on the jurisdiction submitting the request, and the type of facility. We make suggestions to each of these jurisdictions so that they can fill out the correct application, and hopefully they're applying for funds that can be applied to the project that they want to get moving. There's a very long list of potential funding sources. Some of the acronyms that appear frequently on Table 2 are SU. SU funds are surface transportation. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but it's all right. So SU funds, they're the most flexible. They can be spent on a variety of projects, including mass transit, bike ped. They can be applied to roads or highways. A lot of different types of projects can be funded with SU dollars. Some of the more special purpose funding codes are TA, Transportation Alternatives. That funding program, or that program, applies to smaller multimodal projects like bike ped facilities, recreational trails exclusively. Another one that appears, another funding code that appears a lot in the Vision Zero program is HSIP. That stands for Highway Safety Improvement Program. And those dollars can be applied to projects that will have a significant reduction on fatalities or injuries. And then some of the funding sources have a little bit more, a few more restrictions, right? So something like SIGP, CIGP, that stands for County Incentive Grant Program. And based on how I describe it, you'll see why it's a little more inflexible. That fund program is intended to give money to counties so that they can alleviate traffic congestion, specifically on the state highway system. So there are 3 requirements to apply for SIGP funds. Next slide, please. Aside from the funding codes, another good resource to help you all, your staff, and the public understand the TIP is the TIP tool. It's a mapping application that our staff built a number of years ago. You can find a link to it at the top of this slide. It shows all of the adopted projects in the TIP. And then based on a number of characteristics around the county, you can kind of see why a project might be needed. So if you're looking in the urban core city of Tampa, you might see a lot of congestion reduction projects or multimodal projects because there's an urgent need to serve that area with transit, right? At some of the top 20 Vision Zero corridors, you might see a lot of safety projects. So it kind of gives you a sense of what the need is for all of the projects that appear in the TIP. Next slide, please. One other addition that we're making to that TIP tool at the request of the CAC is to include demographic information, demographic data. So, and we agreed. We already have a work order with our staff, and they're working right now on bringing this information into the TIP tool so that you can see the location of transportation projects and overlay that with information like whether or not it's a census tract that has a high proportion of racial minorities, or if it is an area with a high proportion of low income folks, disabled folks. You know, it gives you a sense of where the need is for a lot of these projects as well. So we're working on that. Next slide, please. That pretty much wraps up section 1. So the next section, we're going to go over highlights on tables 1 and 2 and point out some things that have changed from the previous year's tables. Next slide, please. So this year's table 1 has had a few formatting changes that we believe make it easier to read. Last year, table 1 was not organized in any discernible way. Projects were kind of sprinkled throughout without any regard for the impact of the project or what kind of project it is. So we color coded it according to the 5 colors of our investment programs. At the very top of the list, infrastructure projects, followed by safety, smart cities, real choices, and major capacity at the very bottom. There's also a gray section for projects that don't exactly fit into any of our current investment programs. Aside from the formatting, a number of changes have been made as a result of projects moving forward. So 9 projects were completed this past year, and hence they were removed from the list. Those projects include Bush Boulevard resurfacing project, maintenance to the streetcar track, some safety projects at Stowers. I believe that's, I'm not sure actually if that's how you say it. I've never heard of it before. Summerfield Elementary School as well. There were some operational improvements on Courtney Campbell, Dale Mabry Highway. Some transit projects like the Hart Airporter, Cross Bay Ferry got funded for service, and a capacity project on Bruceby Downs. Next slide, please. Several projects were also removed at the request of implementing agencies. Not exactly sure what the reason was for the agencies requesting that they be removed, maybe a deferral into the future. It could also be that they chose to fund it with local dollars. Next slide, please. And the additions. We added many projects to the list this year because they have secured funding for construction. You can see that there are new line items for Hart bus replacements, bus stop repairs, maintaining the T-bar to Vanpool fleet. There's a host of resurfacing and bridge repairs across the county, some safety projects like the Fowler Ave project, that's a complete street project, Green Spine Phase 3C. There's a Smart Cities project at US 41 in Palm River, that's an intersection improvement. Connections, network improvements, and safety improvements as well at the Tampa West Riverwalk that is, and a capacity project at Rio Street to connect the Howard Franklin Bridge Trail to the local street network. Next slide, please. All right, so that about wraps up Table 1. Table 2, quite a few slides are coming. Again, this is the heavy lift for the TIP each year. Table 2 is the part of the TIP that requires the most time because we have to evaluate each project, collect data for each project, do an evaluation, and then rank it. As I mentioned already, what we know is that Table 2 is a list of priorities. These are projects that we firmly believe will have an impact on some of the county's most urgent transportation problems. So much of what's shown on this slide may look familiar to you. This is a list of our performance targets. It's how we connect the TIP to other performance documents like the State of the System report. For a project to make it onto the TIP priority list, it should have an impact on one of the measures that are highlighted. So you all have engaged in this target setting process for interstate pavement condition and bridge condition. Next slide, please. Regarding transit asset condition. So we're trying to all of the assets in good condition. Next slide, please. When we get a list of priority candidates, we don't actually spend time calculating data and prioritizing projects that fit into state of good repair and resilience. Because there's a tremendously huge backlog of maintenance projects across the county, we just end up allocating as much money as we can, typically about $4 million in SU funds for bus replacements each year. And if Hart wants a little bit of flexibility, they could also use a portion of that money to improve bus stops and other things. Next slide, please. Division 0 category, our safety program. We set a number of targets every single year. The safety condition of our roads is perilous, and so we spend a lot of time focusing on fatal and serious injury crashes. Those are the two performance criteria that we use to rank any projects that are submitted to us that we believe will have a safety impact. Next slide, please. We have to normalize that data. We end up pulling 5 years worth of crash reports, identifying all of the fatal and serious injury crashes. And then once we have that number, we divide it by the number of miles for each one of these projects. Some of the projects that got added to Table 2 this year are a project on Dale Mabry from West Mango Ave to West Pearl Ave. There's a West Shore Boulevard Complete Street project from Kennedy to Boy Scout. There's sidewalk improvements around Tomlin and Marshall Middle Schools. There's another Complete Streets project on Lois Ave from Kennedy to Boy Scout. There's a couple in Temple Terrace, Bullard Parkway Complete Street from Glen Arbin to 78th, and Davis Road from Morris Bridge to Temple Terrace Highway. There's a West Shore Boulevard improvement from Fair Oaks to Neptune Way, and one on Ashley Drive from Tyler to Laurel Street. Next slide, please. The third investment program is Smart Cities. Again, this focuses on reliability. Some congestion reduction projects can also fit in here, but when we're evaluating Smart Cities submissions, next slide, please, we look at a whole bunch of data. A lot of these projects that come to us don't have much in common with another, so it wouldn't be unheard of for us to get submissions for a traditional congestion reduction project like an intersection improvement. We may also get a project that is very high tech, like a parking management system for downtown parking garages. This year, we got requests for Hart CAD AVL system replacement. CAD AVL is a traffic management system that allows Hart to track the location of buses to make sure that they get to the destination on time. So as you can see, a lot of these projects might not have anything in common with one another. So there's a ton of data for us to sort through in an attempt to rank them. We look at things like peak period travel time, travel delay measured in minutes. For intersection improvements, we could look at delay on the approach for the intersection. If it's a project around a specific location, like a school or a parking garage, we may look at delay within 1 square mile of that location. And for transit projects like Hart's CAD AVL, we look at on-time performance, which tells us how frequently buses are getting to their destination on time. We got 4 submissions for Smart Cities this year. The top 3 are all intersection improvement projects in Plant City. They're Alexander Street at Jim Johnson Road, Alexander Street at James Redmond Parkway, South Park Road at Coronet, and of course, Hart's vehicle or CAD AVL system, the vehicle tracking software or system. Next slide, please. Our 4th investment program is Real Choices When Not Driving. These are multimodal projects to encourage the use of transit and biking and walking. When we rank these projects, we're looking at the population density within a short walk of either a transit line or a trailer side path. We had a few submissions this year, 14th Street north of Columbus Drive to south of 13th Ave. This is a project right around I-4. Adamo Drive Greenway Gap from 22nd Street to 34th Street. Whiteway Drive Footbridge in Temple Terrace. This is a bridge that can support not only pedestrians, but also will be rated for golf carts. and then the South Tampa Greenway at Picnic Island Park. Next slide, please. And the final investment program is major investments for economic growth. These, again, are the high-cost projects. We're talking about traditional capacity projects like widening. Mass transit projects can also fit in here, but really any project that just has a high value attached to it would probably get lumped into major investments program. We do this because any project, any widening project that's listed in the TIP has to also be referenced in the LRTP. So that's one additional nuance to getting a project listed in major investments. As far as assessing it based on the data, we look at whether or not the project will serve a job cluster. So if it's serving a major job cluster or a connection between job clusters, or if it serves a minor job cluster or no job cluster, we use that as the first sort to rank these projects. If there happens to be a tie, let's say there's two projects, both of them serve a major job cluster, we'll start looking at things like volume to capacity ratio, as in how congested is the road that the project is serving. And then if there's still a tie, we'll look at delay reduction per center line mile. There are 4 submissions for major investments. The first is a transit project, North-South Metro Rapid Construction, AKA the Tampa Arterial BRT, Brush Street from Whiting to Kennedy, Gibsonton Drive from I-75 to 301, and Big Bend Road bookends, which is also or is seeking to become a regional priority from US 41 to Covington Garden Drive, and then Simmons Loop to US 301. Just yesterday, we got an additional submission from FDOT. We haven't calculated the performance yet, so we'll be working on that the rest of the day, and based on the performance measures, we'll rank it in order, and then we'll send out an update to all the committees letting them know of the change. Next slide, please. So that wraps up the major changes from last year's tables to this year's. I want to spend just a few moments talking about the next step. Next slide, please. So the first order of business is for us to coordinate with the rest of the region through the newly dubbed Suncoast Transportation Alliance. I'm sorry, Beth and Commissioner Kemp, I know you're involved in that and I'm butchering the name, but it's formerly the Chair's Coordinating Committee. We're going to be working with staff from each of the MPOs that fall within the CCC region and trying to get consensus on which regionally significant projects need to be identified in the TIP for prioritization. There are a few different ways that a project could end up in the TIP because they demonstrate regional significance. The first program to identify regional projects is Transportation Regional Incentive Program. That is a program that funds projects that support commerce or connections to regionally significant roadways. So we have already had a couple meetings with working group composed of staff from all of the MPOs. We have submitted a new request that Hillsborough County submitted to us for Big Bend Road. The submission was Big Bend Road. The center portion where it intersects with I-75 was already on the Regional Incentive Program priority list, and that was funded. So now the county is looking to complete the bookends of that project from US 41 to Covington Garden on the west side, and then Simmons Loop to 301 on the east side. There's also an opportunity to get regional trail projects listed on the TIP, and Wade Reynolds of our staff is coordinating with the multi-use trail priority working group. So they have already met, and I believe they're identifying candidate projects that might qualify for Sun Trail or TA funds. And there's also some major projects that, statewide projects that could be included. And those projects could include things from the Strategic Intermodal System Plan. They could qualify for Florida New Starts funding. We plan on creating this list of regionally significant projects and then submitting it to the CCC at their meeting on June 25th. And if it's adopted at that meeting, they will have to, we want to get ahead of that by adopting these regionally significant projects into our TIP so that when they're adopted by the CCC in June 25th, they will be consistent. Next slide, please. The next steps for TIP production. We have already completed a couple of these. By the end of April, we wrapped up a preliminary draft of the TIP. We have put that information on our webpage, as well as tables 1, 2, 3, and a funding summary. We're still making updates to that based on requests that are still coming in from the agencies. The agencies have also been working close with us to provide some information that may have been missing. And so our goal is to get these tables out in as complete form as possible. Now it's almost the middle of May. We're just about wrapped up with all that project information. After we make that addition from the submission that we received from DOT yesterday, we will post the updated table onto the webpage and then alert everyone that there's been a change that they need to review. We're going to spend the rest of this month and the early part of June making the rounds within our committees. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, we tried to wrap up the TIP draft and preliminary versions of the tables much earlier than in years past so that we could give the TAC, CAC, and now policy a good opportunity to review things ahead of time so that they don't feel overwhelmed when that meeting in June comes up and they feel like they have to make a decision without information. We actually met with a small working group of folks from the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they told us that the most intimidating part about serving on the committee is that they feel that they don't have full information and then they have to make. It could affect the long-term viability of the county. And so as best we can, we want to alleviate and the this year is really going to again, we're going to be taking this to committees, circulating in our documents to the public so that we can get feedback from folks who may not have knowledge of the TIP process. So we're reaching out to the regular folks in the community and asking them to provide us with comments as well. And hopefully all of that will culminate in a very smooth TIP public hearing to be held on June 9th. And if everything goes well, we will get approval from the board. Next slide, please. I think that about wraps it up. I'm ready to answer any questions and would be happy to hear any feedback you all have for me.
I don't know if you had anything to say, Ms. Alden.
Sure, I'd love to add just a couple of things. I'm also interested to hear from you all about your thoughts and is this providing a more complete picture to you of the process that we're going through together every year, and what can we do better? So, I think sort of in the big picture, the way to think about all of this information that Johnny has presented is to think about the TPO's role, and I'm getting used to saying that too, is particularly regarding the federal and state grants and how can we as a community make the best use of those grant opportunities to support what each of our agencies are doing. So, for example, when we're talking about the performance measures, some of those performance measures are reporting on like the system as a whole, like the safety of the system as a whole, or good repair as a whole. That's something that all of the local governments are working on, that the Florida DOT is working on. The Port Authority and the Aviation Authority are working on good repair projects and safety projects. We can show some of those outcomes in our performance metrics. When we're setting priorities, what we're really doing is looking at kind of a subset of projects that this group would like to see get some extra grant funding because this group identifies them as of strategic importance in advancing our community's goals. So I hope that helps a little bit in framing this.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I'll start before, I have a lot of questions, but I want to say that both the presentation that I had by Fdot about a week ago, the briefing, was the clearest briefing and the clearest mapping and presentation that I have ever had. And that was clear. This is, I think, so much better than I've seen in my 4 years in terms of clarity and understanding and explaining exactly, it's been quite a mystery in some ways, I think, even though I went to a whole weekend workshop to try to figure out how the tip worked and how the MPO did this. And I think it really helps to get early, to have the pre-screenings by the, have the boards submit these different items, but also just the way that this was presented with the colors and the clarity. I just thought this was extremely, and to whomever, I don't know if Mr. Wong was the only, I'm sure that there was a collaborative group, but I think it it's a very different presentation, I feel like, in terms of clarity than we've had in the past, and I think it's a really good one. The maps are really wonderful to have. It's sometimes hard to, I'm really glad to have, and I have yours, Commissioner Cohen, but I have mine actually down in my office. I brought it in, and I'd been looking at it at home, but so it was very helpful, I think, to have it in this format than you usually get on as big as the screen, or even in a 8.5 by 11 when you print it off. The one thing I think, and I know that we've gotten away from doing paper, and that's been a traditional of the TPO, but I think the one thing would be to actually provide printed lists of the tip and the, all separated out color. I know that's a bit of a burden, but I think that would be the one significant thing that could be helpful, here. But I just wanted to be, I'll go to everybody else and have them ask questions, and I've.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
I totally agree with what you just said, by the way. I think that you're 100% right. And I wanted to just say something about that June 25th meeting that was mentioned earlier. I believe I'm going to be at that, and I believe I'm chairing it, and it's in Bradenton. And it seems to me, I'm very prepared to go in and advocate to make Big Bend a regional priority. I think that's been very clearly, the need for that has been demonstrated. But what I hope all the members of the TPO will do as we're considering the tip is point out what you feel are the regional priorities, so we can really go down there loaded for bear with what the board feels are the things that they want to see emphasized. Because it sounds to me like it's going to be really, really important that we have our ducks in a row for whatever horse trading occurs with the other counties. So I just wanted to mention that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will, I'm going to just start, and I'm not sure that it puts it in order of hand raising here, but hopefully we'll have a pretty robust conversation with a lot of questions answered. Very good. And I will recognize first Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. Totally agree. Excellent presentation. Really glad to see this information coming so well organized. I would very much like to have a copy of this presentation for my files as well. And one quick question, what is FDOT's submission that you got yesterday?
Thank you, Commissioner. Both commissioners, actually. I appreciate the kudos. It wasn't just me, of course, it was a team effort, and I just want to take a moment to recognize a member of my team, Vishaka, Raman. She and I have been working long hours over the previous 3 months to get this ready and in a format that we think the community will appreciate and is readable and simple and understandable. So I appreciate all those comments. Commissioner Smith, we had a meeting with FDOT yesterday to review our, basically to go down a checklist of elements in the tip that need to be included. And during that meeting, they will go over all of the elements that are in the tip, from the narrative text part to the tables, and double check that all of our cost projections are accurate. And one of the things that they noted was that the West Shore Interchange project needs to be listed as a priority seeking funding because it's not fully funded yet. The request is for $950 million to complete the project. And we had moved it from table 2 to table 1 because it has received some funding, but apparently it hasn't received all of the funding it needs. So they advocated for us to leave it on table 2.
Okay, so that was the submission that you referred to, that they had a submission?
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay, okay, and as to Commissioner Cohen's question about priorities, let me just put in a plug for the South Coast Greenway Trail in any of its segments that I've been working on, and bringing coalitions of chambers of commerce and Sierra Club and developer organizations and everybody to every inflection point for 15, 20 years. And we are beginning to fund segments of it, but that is a priority project for Vision Zero, alternative transportation, something relatively inexpensive that we can do in to connect. Actually, it is part of the Sun Trail system of state trails that would eventually connect regionally. The South Manatee County through up to downtown Tampa and beyond. So it is a regional project that a lot of people from a broad range of groups have been advocating for a long time. And I want to have a shout out to the CAC, who I think is such a valuable resource of community input to this MPO, TPO, and thank them for adding that map of communities of concern into this process. I think that's a really good layer of information for us as we prioritize and understand transportation projects, their impacts on communities and the needs of communities. And along that same vein, glad to hear that the CAC is really engaged and that the TPO staff is working together with them to get them information early and provide them opportunity for comment. And so my last question is, how will the CAC be providing input to us to this TIP process?
So I'm not sure at the moment. Beth or Cheryl can probably provide some info. I'm not sure whether that will be a hybrid meeting, in person or virtual. I imagine that a certain number of committee members will not want to attend in person. So I'll leave them to discuss the meeting in June. At the meetings that we've had over the previous 4 or 5 weeks, the CAC established an ad hoc committee of folks who are specifically interested in helping us improve the TIP. We met with them on 2 evenings, and the first meeting was just for us to listen and to hear what they had to say about how the TIP is laid out. We heard a lot of things from them that frankly agree with. They told us that it's very intimidating. The document is way too long, it's complicated. And based on their feedback, our goal for this project, to overhaul it this year, was to make it simple. We took it from an approximately 200-page document to 12. And we only focused on including information that they asked us to provide. We didn't want to overwhelm them with all of the regulations that apply, because that's not information they need to provide input on the priority list. We met with them again, and they are still working to provide us with feedback to improve. At this point, I think we have a pretty good tip, but we could still do better. And based on the presentation that I gave earlier this month, they had a number of questions about the process for measuring the impacts of highway projects. They had some questions about how we assess equity, and those are conversations that I don't think we could, we're not even touching the tip of the iceberg within a 2-hour meeting. So we asked them to continue having that conversation with us throughout the rest of the year. We know that our performance metrics aren't perfect. We're limited by what data we can access, but we want to continue pursuing that so we can do an even better job of accurately reflecting the impacts of the project, not only quantitatively, but also from a qualitative community viability standpoint.
Well, thank you very much, because that interface and exchange of information with them is really important to us to have a good product. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't want to echo what everybody else has said, but this is stellar as compared to what I've tried to navigate over the many years. So kudos to everyone involved in making the changes. And what it does is it does help us understand the true value of the TPO, because of the collaborative nature it has, not only with our various different governmental staff, but also with the leaders within the organizations that hear and work with our CAC, which is a critical element, but also with the citizens of our community. Because as we know, there's transportation's on the top of mind for many of our citizens, largely because of where we are in terms of how we're growing. But the work that's being done here, honestly, is stellar. And I want to say thank you, Beth, for your leadership in making that happen. What's also important is I'm looking at the actual draft of new priorities, and on it does have, and this is, I'm bringing this up to you, Commissioner Cohen, because you're going to the CCC meeting. But as a member of the TMA, we've had robust discussions about the value of moving forward, and finally, in a timely fashion, of investigating how to negotiate possibly, or how to plan for a CSX opportunity, a real, true, rail type of opportunity in concert with what's needed in freight, but also for a commuter option. And on the list, number one on the economic growth list is the HART project of doing the CSX study. And there's a $3.5 million that's asked for. They've budgeted $150,000 to complete the assessment that has to be updated for the 14th or 18th or some number of times, because we haven't moved it forward. But I'm glad to see it. And it does list as being a top priority for the MPO board, but it's also on the priority list for the TMA. And so I think there's times where you recognize there's more than just one collaborative effort, and it can't all get in this document, but I think it needs to be said. The other
Did you say
valuable.
it's money for Hart? Is the money go to Hart, though? Is that right?
3.5 million is requested, Hart has budgeted 150,000, right? And is what's listed here. So it takes a lot of planning to work on this, so it's going to take multiple jurisdictions, I'm sure, but the bulk of it would work through Hart's process. But I think what's also valuable that we did this year, and I hope that we continue that process, is I know at the Board of County Commission, we adopted, I guess last year, a process of making sure that all of the commissioners had an opportunity to look at the tip list and vote on it before it was presented to the MPO. That allowed for not only the MPO or TPO staff to meet with transportation staff, because they're the one doing all the planning and figuring it out and finance, trying to figure out how to fund it. But it also gives an importance to meeting with the leadership. Because ultimately, whether it be the Expressway Authority or Temple Terrace or Plant City or Hillsborough County or the city of Tampa, we all approve our budgets. We all have to work through those issues. And there's a partnership in both municipal, county, state, and federal funding sources that all has to be negotiated. And so I appreciate this year where we actually did a little more of that, where we not only met with the staff to get what's on their priority list, but also meet with the leaders. Because when we are all working together, we get the result of good government. And this is one of the best examples of how that collaboration works well. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone involved, because I think it really does make a difference. And the valuable experience that we have from our citizens that volunteer their time and they are committed to it, I just want to say thank you to them too, because they've really helped us come up with a way of understanding a very complex system in a way that it's easier to understand why these things are formulated the way they are. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, and I don't see any other hands raised at this time. Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, I have a question just for informational purposes. Does the tip contain the entire, say, county transportation program, or is it only their portion of the program that's seeking federal funds?
So that's a great question. The TIP document as a whole shows for informational purposes the capital improvement programs of all of the local governments, Hart's 5-year TDP projects, the Expressway Authority projects, the Port Tampa Bay projects, Aviation Authority projects, shows all of those for information, so that we have that at our fingertips when we can talk about how to coordinate the transportation systems. For the purposes of our priority list, and that was, why I made those remarks earlier, our priority list is focused on those federal and state grants, which are going to be a subset, obviously, of all of the funded projects in our community.
Right. So the full programs are in there, which is good to know. I'm a numbers guy. I'd love to see what portion of each jurisdiction's TIP project are, TIP required versus what portion they have that are not TIP required in terms of approval for funding, because those obviously are at the full control of the governance of each of those jurisdictions, that other portion. So I'd just like to know if I could see those kind of numbers. I don't know if you know off the top of your head, for example, of the total value of the transportation program we look at in a 5-year period, how much of that is required to go through a TIP approval process to get the federal state funding shares. That would be it's sort of, in my mind, it's how much do we control directly? How much do we have to seek input and approval from others on is just a good number to have. So just me. Request if you can, fine. If you can't, I'm good too.
Sure. We could focus specifically on the grant programs if you would like, which is where this board has the most direct authority. I think the real value of the TPO is, as some of you have alluded to just now, is in the collaborative effort of working together on things that we all value.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that was a very good question. I mean, very, something that I've kind of tried to put my finger on before too, so.
I have to agree that the way that Beth and Johnny have laid this out is one of the clearest I've seen for a tip. Tips are messy, complicated, and the rules that they have to follow that you don't want to see or know about are, they make me dizzy. And I've been in the business a long time, but, so that was just another, it's like, well, let's nest it inside of this. That was the thought process. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a lot of questions that go a lot of different ways, so I'm not sure. I'm not even sure where to begin in some ways, but I'll start with what has maybe traditionally been the focus of a lot of the TIP meetings for the last 5 years. We've met till 4 in the morning some years with the interstate, the TBX that has been there. And I'll say, and I know the CAC has voted, in support of this, not totally unanimously, of the segment 6, which is the downtown interchange. And it's got here 7 pieces of property, vacant property, and I guess that they voted in support of it with the limitation that that there would be no more property taken. And that's probably, and I appreciate Commissioner Smith saying we really need to hear, the CAC is an amazing group that I think vets things so well for us, and I think that has been a focus. But did I characterize that correctly, Ms. Alden? I just heard about that.
Yes, that's right, and we'll have some more information for you about that at our 10 a.m. meeting.
And, okay, so the other was that over the years, and I was very much pleased to see the reduction. I was very concerned about the interchange being blown out even further. I think it's had I don't believe that, for me, interstates going through cities are not an enhancement and economically. They hurt us, and the more that they would take out an impact, I thought would be, the more with express lanes going over and through and, plans. So I very, very much appreciate what has been done to make that work as well as we could for safety, for movement, for everything else. But I am concerned about segment 7, which is the segment that goes, it kind of gets changed from time to time from what I can tell. I usually talk about it as being north of the interchange to, I guess, Bears Avenue. And so I'm really concerned about, because as I understand it, the plan is still out there to add 30 feet of pavement, 15 feet, and typical lanes on interstates are 12 feet. So 15 feet of pavement, 30 feet up the middle. Now, it's, and this was initially put out as a bus on shoulder program, which I think is really not in the cards anymore, going through T-Barda and what and I won't go into that so much, but I think I have been very much, and those who come before us in the hundreds at some points have been very much opposed to adding those lanes in. And my concern is that if we continue to go down that path with this tip, that we are going to have 2 15-foot lanes. I don't really understand why. They can be used for anything in the future, and that they would lead in to the interchange that we have so carefully made sure it didn't blow up in the middle of the city. And despite whether there's takings or whatever, the impacts of that in terms of air pollution, traffic, the inability of even the ramps to take that, the fact that 60% of the people that use that part of the drivers on that are local people. So I'm just going to say that I'm concerned about how this overlays and the future of how this will affect the interchange that we've so carefully put out here on segment 7. And
Can I just ask for clarification from you?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're not talking about today's vote, you're really talking about the issue next month.
Right.
On July 9th.
Right.
The issue in the tip, not what you're pointing at, I believe, is for today. I'm just making
Right,
sure.
no, yeah. I'm talking about next month, because we're talking about the
Okay.
tip, and this
Got it.
isn't too early
No,
to
got
talk
it,
about.
got it. I just
Yeah.
want to be clear what we're talking about.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I just wanted to bring that up, because to me, that has been the focus of the TIP meeting, and to not refer to that. And I'm really concerned about how it would impact what I feel is a very good way to move forward on segment 6. But segment 6 is not divorced from segment 7. And I'm still very concerned about segment 7, and I'm very concerned about how that moves forward and impacts and the costs and everything else to this community. So that is kind of a little bit different than the other things. You're correct in that, Commissioner Cohen, but I thought that, I know that there's lots of community concern.
I just wanted to point
focus.
it out because I happen to agree with you, so I
Yes,
wanted
yes,
to-
yes, I wasn't,
clear up
thank
to
you.
my- yeah.
Yes. So, and then in terms of some other things, I'm just thinking now, and I think it's the posture of how this has happened, but one of the the best regional projects that we've had cooperation on, the county has now adopted, at least for the first part now, is the ferry between Tampa and St. Petersburg, which is has been so successful. It's been paid for by 5 jurisdictions. And we had first an initial pilot project, then we had our three years of equal payments being made by, for those who don't know the history, Pinellas, Hillsborough, St. Petersburg, Tampa, as well as Fdot. And it's worked incredibly well and great success. And now the county has, the city of St. Petersburg Mayor Kreisman was he had first put that project forward and did the legwork for the 3 years. The 3 years are now, have been done. And now the county voted to adopt, first of all, to, the continuation of the St. Petersburg to Tampa ferry, or Tampa to St. Petersburg ferry. And I'm just wondering from you, Ms. Alden, and I probably should have asked this otherwise, but it's just striking me as being remiss, especially when we talk about regional projects, of being not being on this list. And I think it's kind of the posture and timing of how that all went forward. So in terms of that, what would you suggest that how we move that on this in terms of the tip? And I thought of it too, because Mr. Wagner, what you were saying just about, it's been a project that FDOT's been funding that's never been on the tip.
So yeah, a lot of questions there. And this has been kind of a moving target, and the role of the regional coalition of MPOs has evolved over time. So how we have addressed this has changed over time. We just had a discussion at our spring quarter meeting of the TMA Leadership Group, which is Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco MPOs, to look at how there's some small, kind of small pots of funds that the DOT has available for transit projects. So those are service development grants, their corridor grants, and their park and ride grants. Like I said, small pots of funds generally require a local match, and in some cases have focused on routes that connect across county lines, not always. It was this pot of funds that was used for the latest ferry project. So that went forward in part after we had some previous discussions about it at the TMA, but it really came about because of the work of the two counties and City of St. Petersburg championing that project. One of the questions that we've had at the TMA is the way that those state grants are getting allocated. Is that also strategic? Is that being done as sort of part of the big picture of what are the transit priorities for this region? And the TMA leadership group would like to be more involved in that process, I think it's fair to say, and indicated to us that they would like staff to come back with some recommendations, do some more work with the local transit agencies to make sure that we're being strategic and aligning, for example, HART's priorities for regional, for express routes, aligning HART's priorities for express routes with PSTA's priorities for express routes, and seeing where we could add some state grant funding to try to make that more real. We had hoped to bring that back to the summer meeting of the TMA leadership group. I believe that we are going to need to give HART a little bit more time to work through its strategic priorities. So I don't know that we'll be able to make a recommendation, kind of a complete recommendation this summer. But we could certainly bring forward the ferry project, which has been doing well, and advocate for that to continue to be funded through these state grant programs. So that would be my suggestion to you. I'd love to have some support from this board, a strong statement from this board, if that's your wish. Ideally, the way that would happen is through our TIP priority list. And so I guess we'll need to coordinate with county staff about adding that project as a candidate to the TPO priority list.
I normally would have asked this at some other sequence or not necessarily at meeting time, but I just, it just strikes me as a really important regional project that everybody agrees on that we're not recognizing in this. And thank you again to Commissioner Overman bringing up the CSX. I know we got a pretty significant vote last year in terms of, this board looking at CSX. In fact, I think we listed it tops on the in its category as a priority as well. And so, I'm interested in seeing how that moves forward, at least so we can start to explore the ideas. Again, the posture of HART has been in flux for some time. I think we now have an excellent CEO that we will really help us to start to move our projects and start to look at what is feasible and what's not. So I'm really happy, but I just want to emphasize again that in terms of trails, and I know Commissioner Smith has been an advocate for decades for the South Coast Greenway. There's no one who I think has done more to advocate and push for that really important connection through the south of Hillsborough County. And it probably is just as well at any time to recognize here too that forever we've had it as a priority in the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, a 2-mile segment that does a connection north that I've been asked about for years, that I asked when I first came here in 2017, and I've been getting calls, connects it to the rest of the state, going across the state, and it's been right there at the top of our regional priority lists for a while. And as I understand, and just this is for the commissioners here, that there is I think it's a $7 or $8 million project that we could leverage some state money for, but there's a $2 million barrier, and that's that this land is privately owned, and there hasn't been a willingness in the past to do anything about it or to look at it, but apparently now there is. And I have gotten some estimates of that, and if we were able to leverage that part of it, which it can't be paid for in terms of completion and leveraging that money unless we in Hillsborough County do the first part of that. So I'm going to be bringing that forward now that I've really kind of finally figured out that barrier. So, we'll be looking at that, and I know I'm getting a lot of calls and from the community up there on the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, and that would be something that I'll bring forward to the commissioners. I know there's not, let's see, we only have a little more time, so I wanted to mention all of that. I wanted to say it was really interesting to me, and maybe you've done this before, and maybe it just wasn't as clear, but the kind of metrics, is this for like, I wasn't sure if it was just to one of the categories when Mr. Wong said, looking at the metrics, the number one priority based on job cluster or connection, major, minor, and no connection at all, volume and capacity. And then I thought the third thing was lane reduction. Was that, can you refer to what exactly you were referring to on that, Mr. Wong? Was that applying to all the projects?
It's vehicle hours of delay reduction, and it's
Delay reduction, vehicle hours of delay reduction. I'm sorry that I was trying to make out what statement was made.
Sure. Those are the criteria for the major projects for economic growth.
Okay, so, if, I was just curious, like if, in terms of what's on our tip, is there a way to kind of click through and see these metrics?
On the TIP priority list, we have added that information. So it is posted on the website. That's a great suggestion about printing all that out, 11 by 17 size. So we'll definitely have that for you at the hearing to refer to.
Because I would really like to see the backup metrics. That's really significant. I think I've never quite, maybe if I understood it, maybe I did in the past, and but it's like I say, when you do it with such clarity, then you start to, we'll start to be, I think, pushing you further. Sure. So that's, for me, a benefit of the clarity, but may cause you all more work, but I think it would really be helpful. The other is just a couple of other questions. So there was one of the categories, didn't it have, maybe it was smart cities for new ads, was 3 Plant City projects, and then the Heart CAD AVL. Is that accurate? So in terms of that, so those priorities, if you add them in, are they just strictly balanced against one another? Yes.
The projects in the Smart Cities program are ranked against each other, yes.
Okay, and it just, so it doesn't, so the CAD AVL is against like 3 intersections in Plant City. So that's, okay, I just wanted to kind of understand how that worked. And I guess no one else submitted new additions, or maybe we do have new additions or we don't from other communities because they've already had those in there, like Hillsborough and Tampa.
There were already some on the list, yes. And
Okay.
so they've all been, we've updated the statistics on travel time reliability at all of those locations. It's a good question about how to rank the HART CAD AVL system in that, and so we've been seeking some some data from HART on the reliability, the on-time performance of the bus system, which of course would be enhanced with that CAD AVL tracking.
And I'll jump into one more place here, and then we can, but I know there's there's been several articles more recently that I've seen in communities, and I actually was contacted with regards to golf carts. And I know that that is a big need, especially in a place like Sun City, that there's a lot of people using that. But I've also seen about other retirement communities. But I'm thinking that in order, I don't know if there's anything on our tip with regards to that, or if that's going to have to come first from something like, Hillsborough County initiating it as a project through, or I'm just wondering about that, because it's, to me, it looks like a need and a real need for the future in some places where, as an alternative for when there's not a walkable community, or when people can't use the walkable community and need other alternatives. And so I just, wanted to know if you had any.
So the multi-use trail system can be used for small electric vehicles. You want to be careful that you are designing that appropriately for safety for all users. But certainly we already have some bicyclists using those trails at, even upwards of 20 miles per hour. We investigated this. I did kind of a deep dive into this topic, working with the city of Temple Terrace a year or two ago, looking at opportunities to improve golf cart movements and be able to get across some of the major roads in Temple Terrace. And actually, there are some good opportunities. I'd be happy to sit down with anybody to give them more details.
And if we only have a few more minutes, I know people might want to take a break. Go ahead.
I just
Commissioner
wanted to say on
Cohen.
the golf cart issue, I did a golf cart ordinance in the city of Tampa for Davis Island. And the reason we chose Davis Island, there was demand, but also because it's geographically isolated and there's only one way on and one way off. So it was very easy to define where the boundaries of it were. But we really were able to use, it was able to coexist with a lot of existing infrastructure, and it happened somewhat toward the end of my term, but I think that model could be used in other places in the community pretty easily. And there is, you're right, there's a lot of demand for it. And it's got some real benefits.
I think we need to start thinking about more as a future, and it might be a little bit harder with infrastructure in Sun City, but that's good.
No, I understand.
Right,
I'm
no,
just-
I know.
It was
I think it's an excellent point, thank you.
it was,
And Commissioner Overman, you had?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, on the tip, I'm specifically honing in on the major investments for economic growth, and there's the column that really talks about funding sources. And so there's SU, what does that stand for? State?
It's for the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, so that's the federal
It's a federal
program.
program, okay.
That can be spent on a wide variety of different types of projects. And then that funding pot is, when it comes to the state of Florida, it's distributed to each of the states. It's then sub-allocated. And so part of it goes to urbanized areas, and that's why there's a U there.
Okay. The reason I ask is it's pretty obvious when it's a state grant, and it's pretty obvious when it's a Federal Transit Administration grant. But it's not always clear if in this list of prioritization, the need for the various different entities to go after federal funds. Because that's a complex process, like we know with being on the HART board, I've learned that that the FTA process for transit funding is a long process. It's a complex, it's very difficult sometimes, tends to be 5 to 10 year process sometimes. So when I see that it's FTA small starts, I kind of have a better understanding of what that timeline looks like and where the dollars are coming. On the federal side, especially now when it appears as though we may have some prioritization when it comes to investing in our infrastructure, and the core elements of our priorities are, safety and economic development and making those connections, that making it maybe more clear if possible in the funding sources, that it would mean that we have to really focus on federal funds and let those in this room, on this board, in leadership position know that, where they need to go to help get that federal grant process moving. Because it is the RAISE fund, the RAISE program, and the variety of other programs that are coming out right now are going to be prioritized on who steps up. And if there's anything in this TIP program that allows for us to step up, then we need to know that.
So I think we better adjourn now to give
Okay.
people a few minutes, and
Thank
I
you.
think it was a good
I think
conversation.
that's what we do need to make sure that with this board is very aware of that opportunity as a whole, so that we can work on advocating for that and for our region. Thanks.
Great, thank you for, I think it was really good discussion this morning and really helpful. I'll tell you, I went a little bit back and forth about it, but whether we should do this, I think it was very good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
We're adjourned.
But we're gonna have to keep you muted until that feedback stops. Also, anyone that has called in with a via phone.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Hillsborough Transportation Planning Organization for Wednesday, May 12th. We're getting started just a little bit late. We had a very robust policy committee meeting this morning. Thank you to Commissioner Kemp for leading what I thought was a very, very robust and productive discussion ahead of some of the things we're going to be considering over the next month. So at this moment, we will start with a call to order. Do we need to do a roll call before we begin, Ms. Alden? Why don't we go ahead and do that?
Commissioner Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner Kemp,
Here.
Commissioner Overman,
Here.
Commissioner Myers. Here. Commissioner Smith,
Here.
Mayor Ross,
Here.
Gena Evans, Melanie Williams, Charles Klug,
Here.
Joe Wagoner,
Here.
Derek Doughty,
Here.
Nate Kilton, Commissioner.
I'm sorry,
Ma-
this is Mayor Rick Lott. I'm on the meeting today.
Thank you. Commissioner Maniscalco,
Here.
Councilman Citro, Councilman Dingfelder, Jessica Vaughn.
Here. Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we begin, please rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our first item this morning is the approval of the minutes from the April 14th, 2021 meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a
Second,
motion
Ms.
from
Campbell.
Commissioner Overman for approval, seconded by Commissioner Myers. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Cohen,
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp,
Yes.
Commissioner Overman,
Yes.
Commissioner Myers,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Ross,
Yes.
Gena Evans, Melanie Williams,
Yes.
Charles Klug,
Yes.
Joe Wagoner,
Yes.
Derek Doughty,
Yes.
Rick Lott,
Yes.
Jessica Vaughn.
Yes, thank you.
Motion passes 13-0.
Okay, thank you very much. And just for clarification, we are going to do roll call votes this morning since we are a combination of live and virtual. With that, we will go to public comment. We have 3 minutes per speaker, and I believe we do have some public comment this morning.
Yes, we have Chris Vella.
Chris, can you hear us? Go ahead, Chris.
Yes. All right. Apparently I missed a party earlier. I don't know what you guys discussed, but apparently it was big. But I wanted to talk about the properties that I guess we have to do a TIP amendment. And it's unfortunate to see a TIP amendment go towards a highway and not towards transit or stopping a highway system. I wanted to point out that this board made a very awesome move looking at racial history and documenting it and spending, I would say large amounts of money to research that. And I was pretty honored to see that. I know that the TPO has used a lot of our photos when we come out to the podium, pre-COVID, and they were proud of that, and we were proud of it, bringing a lot of people to talk about transportation. And then, recently in 2018, there was a non-discrimination plan that was released and identified pretty much all areas around the DTI being the worst in the entire county, economically, socially, and so on. In fact, some of the areas beyond the worst category is where Fdot wants to land. And then we also passed a resolution last year. The MPO passed Resolution 2020-3, supporting racial justice. So my question is, why are we entertaining this tip amendment? This shouldn't even be on the table because this goes against every change that this TPO has been trying to do. It's absolutely ridiculous. The last meeting, I was pretty shocked to hear that we're investing more money on I-4 because there's more crashes. Well, there's always going to be more crashes because I-4 is poorly designed. This technology was explored in the early 80s and it didn't work. I have like news clippings and articles like of the engineers saying that we're going to use a communication system to solve this problem, and it never happened. Then when I heard about how Fdot wants to use the arterials, especially some folks in Seminole Heights, I was just kind of flabbergasted why there wasn't any type of opposition to that. You realize now that Fdot primarily owns 14 lanes going through Seminole Heights. I'm including like Tampa, I'm including Florida Avenue. If you include Nebraska, that's even more. So I don't understand what the messaging is coming from. I talked about how one agency has had a very racist highway system. I've asked to see if maybe we can change some appointees. I've asked to see if we could have more time for public comment. None of those issues have been addressed at all. So again, this goes against everything that you guys were trying to change. We have conflicts with your environmental justice initiatives. We just maintain perfunctory things because we're too scared of the state. Well, you know what, guys? I was really scared to even talk about this highway system. And every day I still am scared to talk about it because I might say the wrong thing or I might give out the wrong idea. But I did it. And you guys did it, too, to become elected officials to get that strength and to deal with the criticism. So look what it got you. You guys have to put your foot down. Who cares about the state? There's also a state initiative at the end of the agenda about EV, electric vehicles. I'm waiting to see if some of y'all would ask FDOT, why are you not considering bicycles? Because they are defined as vehicles in Tallahassee, right? So we should be looking at the least damaging modes. And all of our trips are very short. Josh Frank has come up there a couple of times and he said a lot of the short trips are causing congestion. But imagine if we had EV bicycle networks. That would help quite a bit. And we need to look at walkability. Those are like the two things that have to come first before we allow to invest more money on our highway
Mr. Vella, I
systems,
think your
because in that
time is
report-
up, but thank you very much for your comments
Well,
this morning.
Don't amend the tip.
Do we have any other one signed up for public comment?
Nobody else has signed up, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to committee reports and advance comments. And Ms. Alden, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I believe we have Bill Roberts with us and Davida Franklin as well.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Bill Roberts, the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, to provide a report.
Thank you, Ms. Alden. Good morning, members of the TPO board. I'm happy to provide this report from your all-volunteer Citizens Advisory Committee. As you can tell from some of the items on your agenda, this is a very active and very engaged committee, and we really appreciate the support we get from the staff because we've asked a lot of them here recently. In our most recent meeting on May 5th, the CAC voted approval of the NPO FDOT joint certification. The CAC voted to table the revisions to the public participation plan that was submitted to us. That would shorten the notice period for the Transportation Improvement Program amendments. There was a lot of discussion, more than I expected on this issue. It would shorten from 3 weeks to 2 weeks the notice period. It was pointed out in our meeting that we have upwards of 20 TIP amendments come before the CAC during a year, and to shorten the notice period for the public to have input on that was not something that the CAC felt like it could vote on at this time. The CAC did vote to approve the TIP amendment to fund the right-of-way acquisition for the 7 parcels adjacent to the downtown interchange. We added an amendment stipulating that our approval was conditioned that the DOT not acquire any more properties for this project. And that motion for approving the TIP passed by a vote of 13-5. Finally, we received a briefing on the preliminary TIP. I want to give a tip of the hat to our subcommittee chairman, Amy Espinosa, who put together a subcommittee for the specific purpose of studying and analyzing and hopefully streamlining the TIP analysis process. I think that effort has borne fruit. The staff was very supportive, and I think you heard some comments in your policy committee meeting that are, at least indirectly, a result of that subcommittee. You have on your agenda today a new appointee representing the city of Temple Terrace. We certainly encourage you to approve that recommendation. And then finally, I would comment that one of the items that I understand has just been modified in the upcoming TIP is an item from the FDOT about the West Shore Interchange. Although it wasn't discussed at our most recent meeting, I'll remind all the members of this board of the importance of the West Shore Interchange and its continued support that it has gotten from the CAC. With that, I thank you for the opportunity, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, I don't see any questions from board members, but I do want to express to you, Mr. Roberts, the appreciation of everyone on this board for the work of the CAC. It is a particularly heavy lift this time of the year when we get ready to entertain the TIP, and we appreciate and take into account all of the things that you raise with us. So thank you for that.
Davida Franklin of our,
Paula.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Bill. And I believe we have Davida Franklin on the line of our staff to give a summary of the other advisory committees.
Good morning. Here is your summary of committee reports and community comments. The Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP Amendment, for the downtown interchange was reviewed by the Technical Advisory Committee and the Community Advisory Committee. And Chairman Roberts, he just reviewed with you the Community Advisory Committee's discussion about the amendment. The Technical Advisory Committee had questions, then approved the amendment. The Livable Roadways Committee requested a letter on the manual for traffic control devices, and the committee was briefed about the Federal Highway Administration's suggested changes. Members were concerned the update doesn't do enough to improve safety. The committee requested the TPO send a letter of comment, and that is a draft letter on the agenda for consideration today. Annual certification of the TPO was reviewed by the Technical Advisory Committee and the Community Advisory Committee, and both committees recommended your approval. The update of the Unified Planning Work Program, regarding that, the committees previously discussed planning studies they would like the TPO to consider doing. The board will be briefed about the request during that action item on the agenda, and in particular, the Technical Advisory Committee took action last month to ask that the TPO assist the USF College of Public Health and Hillsborough Environmental Protection Commission in estimating a grassroots air quality monitoring network. Additional items that were voted on were the Technical Advisory Committee and the Community Advisory Committee reviewed the Public Participation Plan, which will come to you for consideration next month. The Technical Advisory Committee also reviewed a list of regional priorities for the Transportation Regional Incentive Program grant funding that looks at projects throughout West Central Florida. There is a list which will be integrated into the overall list of transportation improvement projects for consideration in June. And the Transportation Disadvantaged Coordinating Board reviewed and approved a couple of coordination contracts. They reviewed grievance procedures and also annual rates that the Sunshine Line charges its customers. For our summary of public comments, Dr. Govind Parayil thanked Beth Alden for her participation in the 2021 Global Conference on Sustainability and Resiliency during the pandemic. Sam Owens is displeased about worsening road conditions, and he wanted to make the board aware of the consequences of Commissioner White's decision regarding the all-port transportation tax. Jeff Horwath requested the TPO's 2021 wall calendar, and Julie Scanlon and Peter Sue provided feedback for the Community Advisory Committee regarding signal timing at US 301 and Gibson Drive. Their observation found unusually long wait times. Mauricio Rosas said, we must have reliable bus connections to appeal to the white collar and blue collar sectors, and we must remove the mindset that buses are for the elderly, disabled, and low income persons. Jennifer King is concerned because there's no school zone on US 41 by Lutz K8 that limits traffic to 20 miles per hour during school drop-off and dismissal. Jane from the Safety Harbor Chamber of Commerce requested more regional multi-use trail nets. And Ali Ankudowicz is really impressed with steps taken in the TPO's equity planning and process for the Non-Discrimination Plan update. Legislative aide David Young asked for support to help an artist paint a safety crossing mural in front of Caminiti Exceptional School. And Lena Young said, we in Tampa Heights are joining Vision Zero and advocating for sidewalks in the city of Tampa. Scott Clark, the director of the Sunshine Line, said Joshua and Allison have been doing an outstanding job providing proactive support, insightfulness, and care working with Sunshine Line staff. Eva Dyer thanked Beth Alden for speaking to their Leadership Hillsborough class, and FM stated that the South Selman study was not a Vision Zero project. On social media, on Facebook, the Tampa Hillsborough Expressway Authority thanked us for highlighting their board presentation on the Selman extension. Andrew Gilbert asked, how is the Selman extension a toll road innovation? The National Safety Council thanked us for our help to keep each other safe during Distracted Driving Awareness Month. And Rick Fernandez said, respectfully, he requests that the TPO board reject the proposed amendment to the TIP related to the downtown interchange. He said, many of you have promised never to approve a project expanding the interstate footprint, displacing people and homes, and this project does all three. And on Twitter, Miami City Man says, who wants to bet that neither the author nor Joe Wagner live anywhere near the Selman extension? This includes my report, and Ms. Alden will give a quick report on the policy committee meeting that just occurred. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Davida. And so the policy committee met before our board meeting this morning. We had a detailed discussion about the update, the annual update of the Transportation Improvement Program, and in particular, the update of the TPO's list of priority projects. Staff provided a summary of new funding requests that we've received and how those projects will be considered and ranked. The committee members' discussion suggested that we bring back some information about coordination at the regional level and making sure that we are positioning our candidate projects for success with our regional coordination process through the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance. So we will be back with more information about that. And also that we share information about projects to advocate for potentially with our federal representatives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Alden, and thank you, Ms. Franklin, for that report. We're going to move on to today's action items. The first is committee appointments. Cheryl Wilkening from TPO staff will present that item.
Good morning. The CAC nominated Aya Yasin by the City of Temple Terrace. The TAC nominated Sophia Garantiva, alternate for Planning Commission, Cal Hardy, alternate for Tampa Historic Streetcar Board, and Rick Perez, alternate for Hillsborough County Engineering Division. The LRC nominated Sophia Garantiva, alternate for Planning Commission, and the BPAC nominated Ryan Thomas, Hillsborough County Sheriff. Action, TPO confirm these nominations.
Move to approve the appointments.
Second, Maniscalco.
Okay, we have a motion, I think it was from Mayor Ross, seconded by Commissioner Overman to approve the appointments. All those in favor, we're going to do a roll call vote.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gena Evans, Melanie Williams,
Yes.
Charles Klug,
Yes.
Joe Wagoner,
Yes.
Derek Doughty,
Yes.
Rick Lott,
Yes.
Jessica Vaughn.
Yes.
And the motion passes 13-0.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going to move on now to the Transportation Improvement Program amendment for the downtown interchange. Vishaka Shiva Raman from the TPO staff will introduce Secretary David Gwynn from Fdot, who we are pleased to have joining us this morning. At the end of this discussion, we are going to have a roll call vote. If there is discussion, I just ask everyone to bear with me. Those of you that are in the room, because of the plexiglass, it's hard to see some of your hands. Those of you that are virtual, we're trying to keep track of who raises their hand. But if you feel unrecognized, just wave or make some noise, and we will get to you. So with that, we will turn this over.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for introducing me. I'm Vishaka Shivaraman, TPO staff. Like you just said, I will go over the TIP amendment first and then hand it over to Secretary David Gwynn for his presentation on some of the updates. Thank you. Next slide, please. You must have heard about this, but I would just like to give you the project overview and the background. This amendment is requested by FDOT. It is just for the right-of-way phase to purchase 7 parcels in the downtown area. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, this amendment is for the right-of-way phase. The project number is as given below. It is for the I-4 to I-275 northbound segment. This is part of the Section 6 of Downtown Interchange Operational Improvements. The requested funding is for $2.5 million for this purchase. I would also like to bring you a quick update about this, that this alternative came out of the 2019 Microquest Survey, and it was identified as one of the quick fix solution that was adopted into the LRTP plan. I will bring it up in a second, next slide, please. This is just a simple graphic where you can see the different turning moments. The one in red is from westbound to northbound. The one in blue is from southbound to 75 to I-4. And the one in yellow is from I-4 westbound to southbound to 75. So like you can see here, the parcels which are identified for this purchase is shown in pink color on the north of I-4 and near to 75. Next slide, please. This is another graphic. It was provided by FDOT. It shows the trail alignment. And again, as you can see here, I don't know how clear it is, but this is just to show the highlighted parcels in yellow are the ones that are identified for the purchase. This is the A6 enhancement, which was conducted by FDOT. Next slide, please. Like I said, mentioned before, I would like to show the LRTP reference here at this time. And you can see that it is identified for downtown interchange operational improvements. And there were already these projects identified for this purchase. So this is what is being adopted into the cost feasible SIS plan for 2045 LRTP. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same document. It shows the different phases. And here is the right-of-way for $2.9 million identified for purchase for this downtown interchange project. Next slide, please. This is what I had mentioned to you before, that I'm going to try to show you what came out of how this plan came to fruition. As you can see here, there were 4 options when the Microquest Survey was conducted.
Okay, now, let me ask you, in order to see who's raising their hands. Okay, so if I go to this, and I need to look for a hand, correct?
When they raise their hand, it will pop up.
Mr. Cohen, we can hear you as opposed to the speaker.
Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to show you that this is the 4 options. The first one was no bid, which called for no construction and 0 cost and 0 impact. The option 2 was the safety and traffic quick fix, which was identified in this project. Which was the one which I just explained to you. And as you can see here, it is mainly for reducing crashes. And it doesn't, there is no through lanes, it only adds the ramps and lanes. The option 3 was adding express flyover, which was a much more costly project. And the 4th option was a full rebuild, which was the most expensive project. So this kind of gives you an idea of what are in the 4 options. Next slide, please. This was also a slide which came out of the MPO 2019 Microquest Survey, because I just wanted to show this to you to give you a quick reminder that the traffic and safety quick fix was the highest star rating overall. And you can see here that the people who voted more for the support for this project were the people in the downtown core. You can see in the yellow color, which is the high star rating versus the other 3 options. So that's how this was selected. Next slide, please. Again, this will give you another idea of how it was voted. This quick fix option had more 3, 4, and 5 star rating versus the other 3 options, where the no build had the more number of 1 stars, low preferred, and the full rebuild option had either love or hate, which was a more biased option. And you can see here that this had more 5 ranks ratings compared to the other options. So that's a quick reminder to you how this option came out from the 2045 LRTP plan. Next slide, please. This is again the comparative report. What is customary? What do we have to show here? And you can see here that it is for the right-of-way phase, which is identified here. It also shows the 3 amounts where the funding is coming from: the state preliminary highways, the state in-house product support, and the DDR funds. And you can see here that this was identified by LRTP for a total of $2.54 million. Next slide, please. With this, I request if the board can approve my amendment. And if you don't have any questions, we can pass it to Mr. Secretary David Gwen for his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are going to welcome Secretary Gwynn now, and we will open up the floor for questions and comments after Secretary Gwynn has finished his presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today with the board members. If we can go to, I have a presentation I believe is queued up. Go to the first slide. You've already heard really what the request for today is. It's to ask for a TIP amendment to allow for current year dollars that we've received as a district to be used for the purchase of right-of-way to allow us to build the preferred alternative from the FDIS in the downtown interchange. The first slide I'll bring up you had already seen, and essentially what it did is it showed 3 movements that we're really trying to improve.
Mr. Gwynn, I don't see your slides up, so let me just make sure we have the right visual presentation for everyone.
Okay.
Cheryl, are you able to get Secretary Gwynn's slides pulled up? If not, I can share them.
I see them on my end. Let me go out and come back in.
That's it. Thank you.
There we go.
All right. Okay, so just to, again, you saw this slide a minute ago. Essentially, the recommended alternative was to look at how can we address the 1,000 crashes a year and the congestion that occurs because of that, and some of the backups we received due to certain movements being constrained. And you'll see there were really 3 movements. Southbound 275 to go eastbound on I-4, the return movement, which is the westbound I-4 to go northbound on 275, and then the westbound I-4 to go south on 275. So the right-of-way to be acquired is shown on this. You'll see it as kind of small purple There are 6 parcels that are on the north side of I-4, and there's 1 parcel that is on Central, right where it crosses under 275. That one at 275 and Central is vacant parcel. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, go back one. There you go. So one thing I wanted to just refresh everyone's memory on was in 2017, we made a commitment to the community, to the MPO, to others in the region, that we were going to reach out to the community to try to find some consensus, especially around the downtown interchange. We know that the original proposal that was included in the Tampa Interstate Study, which was kind of the starting point back in 2016-17, was very impactful to the community. Would have required anywhere from 320 to 340 residential relocations. And it quickly became evident to us that that was not the desire of the community, that we needed to look at other options. So the first couple of options we looked at were to continue to have express lanes through the interchange, but not with all the other improvements that we had shown in the previous one that required the more parcels. And that would have required anywhere from 30 to 100 residential relocations. And we still saw that that really was not what was the desire of the community. And so what we were able to do was to come to a consensus that we needed to minimize the number of parcels we impacted, but that doing nothing really wasn't an alternative either, because we can't just allow the number of crashes to continue to increase. In 2012, they were around 500 a year. 2018, they were over 1,000 a year, and we know traffic is going to continue to build. So we looked at the operational improvements, which resulted in 6 residential relocations. Next slide, please. And that came from a lot of community outreach. We had over 100 community events. We had over 42 public meetings. We made presentations, over 250 of them, to a variety of community groups, citizen groups, homeowners associations, et cetera. So we felt like we really did get a lot of good input as part of this. Next slide, please. So probably the most glaring deficiency in the interchange that most people recognize is the southbound I-4 to go eastbound on I-275. It routinely backs up pretty much every day of the week, most hours of the day. And the primary reason is because you only have one lane and the demand is for more than one lane. And also you can't get into that one lane until you get south of MLK. And at that point, there's people getting on at MLK trying to merge to the left. And it creates, as you know, a big bottleneck there and a very unsafe condition of cars queuing in 2 and sometimes 3 lanes trying to get into that one lane. This project will allow us to improve that movement. Next slide, please. Will allow us to improve that movement by creating a 2-lane ramp, but also making the lane that will take you to I-4 start north of Hillsborough, actually up towards Fly. So you will no longer have to worry about merging over to the right at the last minute. You'll be able to get in the correct lane, and we can sign the correct lane all the way up near Sly. The second lane will develop further to the south. We anticipate that that will reduce crashes in that segment about 20%. Now, the other improvement made as part of this was, as those of you who have tried to get onto I-4 from either direction of 275 know, you get immediately put into the main line of I-4. And during that first mile or so, there's a lot of people coming from both directions of 275 trying to either go straight, to go west, to go east on I-4, to move over to get towards the connector, or to go to the right to try to get to 21st and 22nd. That causes a lot of crashes in that area and a lot of weaving and merging. And so the concept was to bring those movements, the movements that want to go to Ybor City, separate and never make them get onto I-4. And so if you want to go to I-4, you'll go onto the main line. If you want to get off at 21st and 22nd, you'll have the opportunity to do that. Now, over the years, probably the last 20 to 25 years, Fdot's worked with the city to talk about how the interchange would function in the future. And one of the major elements that we discussed was, one, if we don't do something about 21st and 22nd, we will overload that interchange. And second, if we had a stop along the way for 14th and 15th Street, it would allow us to distribute traffic better, would allow us to provide better service down Nitio Parkway up into East Tampa. And so that has always been the concept that we've gone forward with. However, we did receive quite a bit of input from residents in that area, and I'll say it was mixed. Some of the folks really liked the additional access, some of the businesses, some of the chamber and others. But there were residents who said, I'm afraid this is going to turn into a speedway. You're going to turn 14th and 15th into a high-speed roadway, and that's what our major concern is from a safety standpoint. We took all that into account, and we are going to do a number of things that we think will mitigate that, and I'll address that on the next slide. We do anticipate that this would result in about a 35% crash reduction on that portion of I-4. And so there is a tremendous safety benefit. Next slide, please. So one of the things we heard a lot about was alternatives to being in your car, trails, bike paths, cycle tracks. And so as part of this project, Fdot will be investing approximately $10 million in upgrading the trails and other modes of transportation within this area. All the blue you see there are new trail connections that will be constructed as part of this project and will tie into other trails. This should create a much more robust trail network for people that want to use bicycles or walk to be able to do so in a safe environment. We also have worked with the city to accelerate the construction of the Green Spine, which is a cycle track similar to what you've seen on Jackson Street downtown. This will come down 15th Street and also continue down Nuccio Parkway. And this will not just be a bike lane, this will be separated by a curb. It will have a protected environment for bicycles to operate within, along with the pedestrian facilities that will also be provided. Next slide, please. Right now, 14th and 15th, when you're looking north of the interstate, they're pretty wide open. And so I think that's part of the reason why you see some higher speeds in that area now. We are working very closely with the city, and what we're looking at is on 14th Street, you see this typical section, we call it, which means basically the lane assignments. What we're looking at doing is putting parking on one side of the street, having two 11-foot travel lanes, and then we show a 6-foot buffer, which could probably be a bicycle lane. However, in discussions with the city, we hear that it may be preferable to go with two 10-foot lanes and on-street parking on both sides. We'll work with the city on that to come up with the preferred alternative. On 15th Street, we will have parking on the one side of the road, we'll have the cycle track on the other, and the lanes will be narrowed to 10-foot lanes. These treatments should result in a significantly slower traffic. People should feel like they should be driving slower. There'll be additional pedestrian and bicycle opportunities. We also will be signalizing the ramp at 14th and 15th, which will also help with pedestrian circulation and slowing traffic that comes off of the interstate. Next slide, please. So last thing I want to mention is we also heard a lot about aesthetics. People want the area to look good. I think a lot of people like some of the treatments that were done previously in the Ybor City area, so we're going to try to match that on a lot of our work here. But we're also hearing that the area underneath some of the cross streets under the interstate is very tight and constrained. And so we're going to go in and cut back the slopes and create a much wider area for bicycles and pedestrians to go underneath the interstate on 14th, 15th, and at Palm. We'll also make sure that the lighting is upgraded to make that a well-lit area. We'll also be putting landscaping along the shared use path and also lighting along the shared use path. And we'll work with the community to determine the landscaping that's desired in that area as we go into the project. Next slide. The last thing I just wanted to mention was that you might say, why are you bringing this here now? Why is this so important? So you may have heard that the legislature did provide an additional $2 billion to be used for infrastructure throughout the state. And all of the districts around the state are preparing their projects that they feel could be ready for construction to start next year or the year after. This project is. And the only thing that we really need in order to continue on the process to try to get that funding for this project is to move on the right-of-way. We understand that any right-of-way acquisition is not desirable. These 6 parcels are really along blocks where we own probably 80% of the property along those blocks. But when we stopped buying right-of-way, a commitment we made until we got the results of the SEIS, we had not approached those properties. So this is the time we're asking you for the TIP amendment so we can move forward and hopefully be able to bring this project to start within the next year or so. And with that, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Secretary Gwynn, thank you very much. I'm going to start with Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. I haven't figured out how to raise my hand on
It's all
my
right.
phone right now.
I
so
saw
I
you
was like-
waving.
Thank you, Mr. Glenn, for this presentation. I know this has been a process with not only the community, but also all of the various different boards, and it's been difficult to get here. I appreciate the time you spent with me this week answering my million questions. I still have some concerns, about Nucio Parkway and the safety there, about the landscaping and insurance that we use established, hardwood types of trees that actually do support the mitigation associated with air conditions, environmental air condition. But I do appreciate the fact that there's some sensitivity to the communities. I do also recognize that, that with the CAC's limitation on the number of property purchases and looking at that, the majority of the properties, I don't think, maybe the committee may not know this, but the majority of the properties that were not identified on that map, that were not on the price list or purchase list, are already owned by Fdot. So that's what's left on that northern side, if I'm not mistaken. I could be corrected, but I think that was what I understood in the briefing that I had. And I think it's critically important that we recognize that when we have blank spaces that are owned, not developed, it does cause deterioration of the neighborhood. So those properties will need to be that still own there need to be treated well. And I wanted to make sure that we work our best, especially with the limited housing available in the area. Relocating and staying in the community is going to be a challenge. And I appreciate FDOT's commitment to assuring that those individuals have another place to relocate to and able to, if they're interested in staying in the community. And that's not a small task. But I do also am very aware of the accident numbers and the increase in the accident numbers on 275 going southbound to the interchange. It's significant. I hear it because I live in that area every day. And they're not little accidents. It's big accidents. And lots of people hurt and lots of injuries, lots of cost. And while I wish we could fix the roller coaster between Sly and the downtown exchange, because I think that's part of the problem, bringing 2 lanes into I-4 may help with the stacking that occurs to approach the interchange. And if the community is happy with the 14th and 15th, I'm willing to support these changes because there has been listening and some changes. As much as I hate to see any properties taken, it is my understanding these are already, have been impacted by the fact that we had a plan for a lot more properties, and I appreciate FDOT's effort to reduce those numbers of properties as much as possible, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman. Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. I want to say, so following this for several years, what's happening, the interchange is the focal point of 2 major interstates meeting, which it's a nightmare combination wherever it's built. It's very, very difficult to have that happen. But we, most unfortunately, have had that happen, not just randomly, like out in an undeveloped area, but right in the center of the city of Tampa. It couldn't be more centrally located. And it was I think at the time, I've said it before, a huge mistake of history. We know from the presentation that Mr. Vella was involved in that, not only were these built and they destroyed the fabric of communities, and were just very, very harmful, but they were aimed at Black and brown communities, and took those away. As such, as we looked at this renewal of this project, this new, one of the biggest projects with regards to the interstate in decades, ever since it was built, actually. And I was, with these new express lanes, with the opening of I-275 from the downtown interchange over to West Shore, I was very concerned about the express lanes, the other options that we saw before this, just blowing out the interchange, the downtown interchange just bringing in all kinds of traffic, but making it really untenable, the fabric of the city that we have now built there. So that being said, I want to say with Secretary Gwen and others, first of all, as I said at the beginning of the prior meeting, and as I said to them in briefing, I've never seen such a clear presentation, and I'm very appreciative of that. I've said to Ms. Alden, also appreciative of these big maps that you can actually see instead of on your little screen, that you can't tell what's going on. So thank you for being so clear, and that's been really good. And also, when and maybe that was part of it, to kind of refresh our memories about how we came here. But when I saw the other options, we had the no build, we had this, the quick fix, I guess you called it, and safety option. And then we had those two other blowing out the interchange options, which I was faced with, and I thought we were headed to, and I thought it was honestly a nightmarish scenario for the future. So I am really grateful that we have this minimized but operational fix. And as you probably have been bored from hearing this, but I've said it before, that when I was in my late 20s, I went to not knowing anything about traffic. I still don't know what I know, but I went to a Fdot meeting where they showed the poster boards around the room, and I saw the poster board where they had this fix back then, and they had one lane going into I-4 south from the I-275 north, the one that you pointed out and have shown the pictures. And I remember looking at that and just saying, oh, that's ridiculous. That will never work. This is going to be like a nightmare if they ever did this. And honestly, I thought it seemed so poorly done that I couldn't even imagine that it would actually ever happen. Little did I know then. And then I saw it, and I think I even wrote out a comment. This will instantly pile traffic in a way that won't work. And that is shortly after it was built. That's what we've seen. So I see that as being a problem. And I see this as being the best of options to deal with that. And, and I think it is de minimis, the impact on the residents there, which I know I've known for years that most of that has been already purchased. And the fix that's been done and the work that's been done on 14th and 15th Street. So I think there's been a lot of good work, and I know some people that have been very involved in this as activists are still a bit frustrated with the end product, but I think that their work and involvement and engagement and everything that they've done has been extraordinarily important for the future and what we have going forward now, that I think is just incredibly improved project, and I'm really, really grateful for it. So with that being said, I'll just also say this is all segment 6. I said this kind of a little earlier, of the TBX project. And then there's segment 7. That is, it seems to be like a little bit undefined to me in some ways. I used to think this goes up to Martin Luther King, but now I know that part of this extension, and I'm not objecting to it as I wasn't before, or when I met with you privately, is now kind of going up to Hannah. My problem is that I've been on TBARDA, and I know about the TBARDA projects and what has kind of been discussed there, what's been in our TIP program in the past, or is on the TIP right now, and that's segment 7 of TB Next or TBX, and that's adding 2 more 15-foot bus on shoulder, I guess it's supposed to be, lanes, 30 more feet of pavement. I know it's within the already designated right-of-way, but I am deeply concerned about how, and I'd like to see somehow when we get the new maps and how that comes down and moves forward with this, because I'll tell you, one of my great concerns are again about piling up traffic, about what we've discovered about air pollution and the impacts, the health impacts on communities and the problem we have with that, as well as if those lanes are activated, they're 15-foot lanes. We typically have 12-foot lanes. What they do in terms of our traffic patterns, that they're maybe not always bus on shoulder, and how we push traffic in through the interchange with those lanes. So I'm just going to kind of leave with that discussion a bit about segment 7, because that's going to be coming up at the TIP meeting as well. But in terms of this that we're voting on, I'm very pleased with this project and what it's turned into, and I do really appreciate that there's been work to make it the best project that we can make it for the future, and the kinds of things that were done, like the green spine trail through the area, the thoughts, the engineering that went into trying to make it as safe and as hospitable as possible. So I'll be supporting it, and I thank you for that work.
All right, Commissioner Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Secretary Gwynn with my briefing one-on-one explaining the new 275 and I-4 in exchange, and also having the opportunity to talk with him. Most of us already know that when it comes to the Black and brown and Hispanic communities, we're always displaced. And where Fdot has owned all of the property except 7 pieces of land that they are trying to purchase now, where they have 4 for rental, 2 owned, and 1 vacant. And I think by adding these vacant properties, it will truly enhance the interstate, because when you're traveling south coming from, I would say, Fowler Fletcher, it begins to back up at Sly, at least for me, not one day, but every day. And you pick and choose the time you want to leave home if you have to go north, and how long it's going to take you to come back home. And every day it's just about an accident or someone about to hit someone else up on the interstate. And so I truly can appreciate the expansion that will be coming, and will be supportive of the project and what Fdot has done to work with those individuals that are living along 14th, to make sure they're not just displaced and have nowhere to go. That's real important when you want to purchase the land. So again, thank you, Secretary Gwynn, for all that you do, meeting with the various communities to make sure that their input is taken into consideration at all of your meetings.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers. I do not see other hands up at this time, and I don't see any of our remote participants raising their hands. I'm going to call on Secretary Gwynn in a moment just to address the Section 7 issue that Commissioner Kemp brought up. But before I do that, I just want to make my own comment. I really agree almost totally, completely with everything that all 3 of my colleagues just said. you know, having participated in this project for many years, the difference between what we are voting on now and what we were looking at 5 years ago is really and truly night and day. And I have been someone whose views have very much evolved on this issue, and as someone who has really listened to the public input over the years and started to understand that there are an awful lot of different stakeholders whose needs have to be accommodated in these decisions. This project originally, and I'm going with what Secretary Gwynn told us earlier, was slated to take 320 to 340 homes. This next iteration of the project was slated to take 30 to 100 homes, still with express lanes going through it. Now we have a project that's taking in the single digits in order to approve crash reductions between 20 and 35%, and to deal with the huge congestion problems Commissioner Myers just mentioned. But short of being on the Howard Franklin Bridge coming into Tampa, being on I-275 going south and trying to get on I-4 is just as frustrating and just as dangerous. So for that reason, I'm also going to be supportive of today's vote. And I want to say that when people look to government and they wonder why there's not more compromise and why people don't come together and keep at it until they find the right solutions for things, this is a great example of that. This started out with hundreds of homes being taken, and because of the really hard work of a lot of people, and that includes the citizens who spoke out for their communities during this process over and over and over again, I believe we've gotten to something that really is the best that we can do for this community to solve legitimate problems and protect existing neighborhoods at the same time. And I also want to reiterate that DOT has been really of a totally new mind in the way that they've engaged with the community on this issue. And with that, I do want to turn it back over to Secretary Gwynn. He's going to address some of the issues Commissioner Kemp brought up.
Okay, so I assume we're talking now segment 7, which I think for most of you, some of you knew.
Sir, can you just speak up just a bit? We're having a little difficulty hearing you in the room.
Can you hear me now?
Very low volume.
Maybe a little.
Is it on?
There you go. That's better.
Can you hear me okay, Commissioner?
That's a little better. Thank you.
I'll try to get as close as I can here.
There you go. There you go. All right.
Okay, they moved the main phone close to me, so I guess the adjunct speaker didn't work as well. So segment 7, for those of you who are familiar with the overall Tampa Bay Next program, it's broken into segments. Actually, the downtown interchange is segment 6. The West Shore interchange is 4 and 5. The segment of I-275 north of the downtown interchange was called segment 7, or still is called segment 7. And at one time, actually, when we started this Tampa Bay Next process, there were express lanes on I-275 up to Beers. And in a lot of our discussions with folks from Seminole Heights, from a lot of the surrounding areas, we heard a lot of opposition to the express lanes. We made a decision to not have express lanes in the ultimate solution, but to have just an additional general purpose lane in each direction at some point in the future that would go up to Bears, would be within the existing right-of-way. And as you know, the TBARTA plan that they've been studying would show a wide shoulder to be used by buses at some point in the future, potentially as a express bus or express corridor for the bus, since there won't be express lanes in that segment. Segment 7 was then broken into more or less 2 subsections. One subsection is the subsection that goes up just past Hillsborough to Hannah. And that's the project that would tie in with this downtown interchange project to allow for you to get in the correct lane up by Hannah, as opposed to waiting till you get south of MLK. And in the opposite direction, take the extra lane up past Hillsborough, drop it near Hannah, as opposed to you have to immediately merge to the left once you get from I-4 onto 275 going northbound, or you have to get off at MLK. The segment north of Hannah currently does not have funding, and we are not actively pursuing that in the design and so forth. When you look at the priorities that we have in our Tampa Bay Next program right now, the West Shore Interchange has been at the top of the list. The downtown interchange was right behind it. After that, we are looking into Pinellas County. So the segment north on segment 7 right now isn't near the top of our priority list. So it's just not one that we have right now at the top of the list. I would mention, though, that as part of this project that we're building, from Hannah all the way south to I-4, there will be noise walls built along both sides of 275, which was something that we got a lot of requests from the community on. So as part of this downtown interchange and the transition piece, there'll be noise walls all the way through that corridor. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp.
Thanks for that clarification. I would have asked more about it when we were briefing, but really I started thinking about it more. I mean, I was very, very focused on the downtown interchange and started thinking more about this because it has been, as you know, well, an area of my focus, plus from my time on T-BART as well, an area of focus with that. So I appreciate that clarification.
All right, at this time, I don't see any more hands raised, and we could entertain a motion to move this along before we continue on with the meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
I'm sorry, was that Commissioner Overman? Okay, Commissioner Overman just moved approval, seconded by Commissioner Myers. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gena Evans?
Yes.
Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Joe Wagner?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Mayor Lott?
Yes.
Councilman Maniscalco?
Yes.
And Jessica Vaughn?
No.
Motion carries 13-1.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going to move on now to a letter requested by the Livable Roadways Committee regarding manual on uniform traffic control devices. And I believe Gena Torres and Paula Flores are going to present this item.
Yes, good morning, MPO Board. I am happy to introduce this item on the manual on uniform traffic control devices, which is as dry as it sounds if you were to read it from cover to cover. But the update of the MUTCD gives us a unique opportunity to influence how our roadways look and function for many years to come. It's a unique opportunity because the bulk of the document is just as it was when it was first written in the 70s. But an update is now being circulated, and with the new DOT Secretary being a champion for safe streets, we believe the manual will go much further to ensure our roads are safe for everyone. So we've asked Paula Flores, our go-to engineer, to provide a brief overview of the update to the MUTCD and the additional changes being suggested that are outlined in a letter requested by the Livable Roadways Committee that is before you for approval. So Paula, you can take it from here.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you for this opportunity.
Can't hear you.
Jump right into the presentation by offering just some highlights. So I will be skipping some slides if you are following the longer slide deck that you may have in your package. Next slide, please. So the manual on uniform traffic control devices is actually one of several federal documents that regulates how and when traffic control devices, signs, and even markings and other treatments are designed. So FHWA and USDOT is in the process of updating sections of the MUTCD, it's how we refer to it, for the first time in 11 years. But unfortunately, what we're finding is that the currently proposed update continues to just tinker at the margins without fundamentally fixing some of the flaws. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the proposed updates to the MUTCD, that's how I pronounce it, includes over 650 proposed changes in this document. It has 780 pages of marked up red text and 600 accompanying figures and tables. So it's very intense. But there are a lot of players. There's also a lot of players involved, including obviously the US DOT and FHWA who own the manual, but others, including the National Committee, which have a lot of representation from various sponsoring organizations, and technical experts are involved in this process. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So they are following a very rigid process, but if it takes 11 years to bring an update to a manual for public comment, it's time to really question the process and urge a different one, and more importantly, question the validity of some of the comments that are actually here and have they changed accordingly with community and practice. Next slide, please. So there's a coalition of organizations such as NACTO, Transportation for America, APVP, and America Walks that are really leading the plea for rewriting the entire MUTCD to be a little bit more proactive when it comes to safety regulation. So many cities already and other organizations, including the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, have already written formal comments and are available on their website. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go really quickly through some of the major general concerns that this coalition of agencies are bringing to everybody's attention, and then followed by a few examples. Next slide, please. So the coalition of agencies are questioning the outcome of these hundreds and hundreds of microscopic comments being presented without an overarching review of the intent of the manual. So some of the general concerns express for the need to completely rewrite the entire manual, which has not been done since 1971, and really encourage some significant changes in it, in addition to inclusion and equity. They're also concerned with outdated practices that provide or prioritize motor vehicle efficiency over safety. Next slide, please. So there are also general concerns about the less flexibility for cities, especially those that have committed to climate change and Vision Zero principles. And the update doesn't allow for rapid innovation in design, quick fixes, technical urbanism that have been applied in so many communities across the country. And there is a concern as well that the manual needs to align better with equity, safety, and sustainability goals. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So there is a call for going back to the original premise of this manual that really just tells us how signs and signals should look like, but not how they should be applied and used. And there's also new language, troubling language, that omits the needs of children, elderly, and disabled users that may seem to not demonstrate due care in use of transportation facilities. So this new language actually permits practitioners to ignore some of the needs of vulnerable users, and this is considered victim blaming, and there is no place in this manual for such actions. Next slide, please. So some of the new language also calls for the right-of-way of streets to be dedicated to highway-related uses only. And this undermines placemaking efforts to create people places that have landscaping and art and benches, etc., including prohibiting crosswalk art instead of just simply guiding and telling us this is what you should consider, but don't prohibit it. There is new updates also that require cities to adopt and prioritize emerging AV technology instead of waiting till such technology is really proven to be roadworthy. So on one hand, the MUTCD is requiring AV technology to be incorporated into cities, but on the other hand, no pedestrian push buttons at intersections are actually required. So there's a gap or a lack of understanding on prioritization of vulnerable users first. Next slide, please. So this is one of the examples that NACTO uses frequently. The rainbow crosswalk is now prohibited, not because there is proven safety studies stating they are dangerous, which there are not, but rather that the art may be distracting to drivers and people walking. So for a committee that is all about the research and data driven, this is actually very arbitrary. So I'm going to show a couple of, next slide, please, detailed examples. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there's a lot of changes in this manual, but I'm only going to talk a little bit about speed limits, signals, bicycle treatments, and painted crosswalks. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so the MATCD has what we call required elements, recommended elements, and optional elements. And when it comes to speed limits, using the 85th percentile speed setting is recommended still in this update, which is very contradictory to the NTSB, or the National Transportation Safety Board's 2017 report that actually recommended it should be eliminated from a consideration in setting speed limits. The updates also talk about incorporating other engineering elements and factors into how to set speed limits, such as context, land use, users, safety, and target speed, and all of that, but it's just recommended. So it's not a requirement, and it allows a lot of professionals to opt out of considering things that should be in a study to develop or establish speed setting limits. Next slide, please. And even according to some of the federal website and their slides, they are still ignoring the full comprehensive NTSB recommendations to remove not just the 85th percentile speed, but other factors. So we currently are urging, and a lot of organizations are urging, request a full integration of the NTSB recommendations in this update. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. Next slide. Here you go. So in terms of signal warrants, this is probably one of the areas that is severely outdated. And signal warrants, actually ignore known conflicts in land use. For example, pedestrian volumes needed to justify a traffic signal are actually higher than the motor vehicle volumes for that same crossing or intersection. Another example is the outdated crash warrant, where multiple years of deadly crashes must occur before a new signal is installed. Again, this is a complete opposition to the Safe Systems approach and Vision Zero principles, which states we must be proactive and institute additional countermeasures to prevent crashes, not wait till they happen. Next slide, please. And when you pull up an example, actually, next slide, please. This one, for example, on a road with 40 miles per hour speeds or higher, which is most roads and arterials in Hillsborough County, or if you are in a very small community with 10,000 population or less, you actually have to watch at least 4 to 9 people die before, in a 3-year period, before you can justify a traffic signal based on the safety lens alone. So this continues to enable the efficiency of cars as more important than the lives of people. And this needs to change. Next slide, please. Okay, from a pedestrian safety, however, there are some changes. There's some good changes in here. But did you know that pedestrian signals are not required in this manual? With pedestrian deaths spiking by 30% plus across the nation, this document still does not require them. And this item continuously comes up for discussion year after year, and is shut down because it may place a heavy cost burden on communities to require them. Unfortunately, fatalities are a heavy cost burden, not push buttons, and push buttons should be required at signalized intersections. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I'm going through these real fast. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, we just covered, skipped a whole bunch of slides, but I do have good news. Moving on to the bicycle treatments, there's a brand new chapter, which includes a lot of new guidance and great guidance of existing practices. That's all good. But there's still something wrong with this section. For the not so good part of the write-up is interim approvals and recommended treatments now will have very high requirements for more studies. You know, and these restrictions associated with studies will preclude a lot of innovation and important design innovations that help actually safety of vulnerable users, especially cyclists on our roads. So one of the problem areas is this restrictions. There's too many studies, too many restrictions on how to do safe bicycle facilities, and communities at a local level truly need more flexibility to consider all tools based on the context and the potential constraints present, not restrictions. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. I'm going to talk about crosswalks here. So crosswalks, FHWA in their presentation and your manuals and your webinars claims that there are no warrants to install crosswalks, and the decision is very local, and it should be. However, what the feds are glossing over is that in the write-up of these crosswalks, the decision-making process that is now more stringent for new unsignalized or mid-block crossings especially. So the updates state a mid-block crossings cannot be any closer than 600 feet from a signalized intersection. And if so, it has to be coordinated with this upstream or downstream intersection. Which then, what that means is that new crossings must be controlled by a traffic signal or by a hawk or a hybrid beacon that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars versus, for example, an RFB, and may cost only $30,000 for that same crossing. This makes adding more safe crossings very difficult. And this minimum spacing between signalized intersections is detrimental to urban walkability, especially in more urban centers and downtown settings. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the revisions also do not include any new aesthetic treatments. In fact, the multicolored treatments, or what we call crosswalk and intersection art, all over the country are now considered under research by the federal government. And FHWA is currently just ignoring the hundreds of multicolored treatments applied throughout the nation. So crosswalk and intersection art is a new best practice in a lot of cities, around schools, around downtowns, around neighborhood streets, including the city of Tampa with the Art on the Block and the Crosswalk to School program. So we must request the acceptance of proven painted crosswalks and painted intersections until otherwise safety studies say they are dangerous. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the comment period ends this Friday, May 14th. The more we push back, the more likely our community can actually contribute to advancing innovative ways to address the crash crisis we are actually dealing in our community here in Hillsborough, in the city of Tampa, and throughout Florida. So we seek your approval for the TPO's letters of response, and I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Ms. Flores, thank you so much for that. That was really interesting, and it really is something that so many of those elements don't appear to be there. Commissioner Overman and then Commissioner Kemp.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much for your report. It's enlightening and frustrating and maddening all at the same time that many of the things that we've asked for as part of our mission towards Vision Zero and safe streets are not addressed in the manual. And while we as a board and as a community can try to work on those things, at the end of the day, when a project goes to PD&E, it's going to use the manual. And so we're constantly fighting an uphill battle. So I truly appreciate the analysis you've done here, giving us a good understanding of what it is that is missing from this, and a letter to send. Given that we don't have, the Board of County Commission doesn't have a meeting between now and next week, I have every intention of penning a similar letter as long as I'm not accused of plagiarism. But the wording in the letter that we're considering really does address it, and I'd love to get a copy of the slides so that I could possibly include some of those main points that are so dear and precious to me. I have spent most of my neighborhood life in this town arguing that the speed of a specific road is not appropriate, and only being told the manual says this is the way we have to do it. So I think it is critical to us to address these concerns in order for us to build the safe communities we'd like to see, and to balance the playing field, because it's very clear with the omissions that are mentioned in this manual that they are omissions in favor of car-centric planning. And that addresses every day when we have a building or a project built. The other thing that is important to realize, when we pay attention to equity and demographics, we find ourselves realizing that individuals that are older walk at about the same speed as individuals with a stroller. So at both ends of the spectrum, if the timing on our walk speed of how long it takes someone to go across the street is not typically what we find is in the specs for the manual for how long a typical adult will cross the street. And I think it's important to recognize our demographics and the ages of our population, to recognize those ages need to have priority when it comes to planning. Just a quick example of how that planning and that manual matter to the people who live and work in our communities. So I'll stop there and would like to move for approval after more board discussion.
Second.
Okay, well, we have a motion from Commissioner Overman, seconded by Commissioner Kemp for approval. And let me just say that if the TPO board does decide to go forward with this, I would suggest we give a copy of this letter to everyone as soon as possible. And then on your own letterhead, if you so desire, you can make your own comments, because I think her point is very well taken. The more letters we send, the better, because some of this, I don't want to use the word stupid, but some of this is actually stupid in terms of how much we've learned over the years about things we can do to make our roads, crosswalks, and sidewalks safer. Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. And I just want to say, Ms. Flores, we are so lucky to have you and to have this presentation. Thank you, Ms. Alden, for putting this presentation on. I think it's really illuminating and answers a lot of questions. I always like to know the history of how these things are created, because this has certainly enormous impact on the work at the MPO, but also our work on land use and everything else that we do as a county commission, our most important issues. In fact, we just got into a discussion at our land use meeting. I think Commissioner Cohen was very involved in that. But with regards to warrants and traffic light warrants. And so this was very interesting about the crosswalks. The fact that they're not using science and data, but just, I don't know, coming up with it out of whatever prejudices that they have about colorful crosswalks. I'm not sure. I know that I sometimes can't see those. We have a few of them in Tampa, and I can't really see those brick crosswalks because they don't distinguish enough from the black asphalt. I can, of course, see them, but they're certainly not as clear, and for drivers as well. But anyway, this is, I'm so pleased to have this analyzed for us in advance here, and to understand more about that, and to give us the opportunity to be part of weighing in on that with all this analysis that you've provided, because it's certainly important for the future. And I'm just hoping that you and those that are looking at this with such an eye can somehow take over the new rewrite, and maybe it won't take 11 years, and we can get something going out of there that would be beneficial to communities across the country, including us. So thanks for bringing this forward. And thank you also, Ms. Alden, for bringing this forward and bringing and educating us, because I think it's just really important. We just get all, this stuff raised to us all the time, coming from this exact manual. So I think it's really important that the book has a rework in a really significant way, rather than just a re-endorsement, or I don't know even what it is. They're even tightening it up in bad ways. So as you pointed out with the crosswalks. So thank you.
Mayor Ross.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be brief. I just want to point out to my colleagues, just food for thought here, is that obviously what we're talking about is a manual for uniform traffic control, which so uniform implies they're trying to make sure stop signs look the same everywhere and the same formulas are used. But part of our, and this is the part I just want you to consider, is that part of our objection to this, and rightfully so, is that it doesn't allow for enough local flexibility. It mandates only certain type things. It pigeonholes local authority. And then on the other hand, though, some of our objections are truly on the other hand. They make recommendations and we want them to make requirements out of those recommendations. And so I would just offer that it's kind of hard to take both positions. And if we want to champion local flexibility, maybe we should stick with that. But it's hard to say we want flexibility to do crosswalks, but we want you to mandate this type of calculation for speed or whatever. So I just think it's hard to take both positions.
Thank you, Mayor Ross. I don't believe I see any additional hands at this time. And since I do not, we have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Overman, seconded by Commissioner Kemp, to read a letter. And please call the roll on that motion.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gena Evans?
Yes.
Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Joe Wagoner?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Mayor Lott?
Yes.
Councilman Maniscalco?
Yes.
Jessica Vaughn?
Yes.
Motion carries 14-0.
A lot of yeses if you include the echoes.
Thank you. Yes. All right, we are moving right along to the annual certification of the TPO, and Johnny Wong is back to present that item.
Morning, MPO board members. Cheryl, can you click through my slides, please? Johnny Wong, TPO staff. I'm here to go over the results of the MPO Fdot joint certification review process that we had undertaken just a few months ago. Next slide, please. The joint certification review happens every year with Fdot staff. They spend a little bit of time reviewing our work products and our financials to ensure that we're meeting all of the requirements that apply to MPOs. Then once every 4 years, we have an even more elaborate and detailed federal review, which is conducted by members of the Federal Highway Administration, and they really spend a lot of time assessing our work products. Both of those reviews serve as report cards for us. Staff take notes on the quality of the work that we're doing, and they identify areas where we're setting an example for other MPOs to follow. They also recommend actions that are suggestions for us to improve our work, and they would also note any corrective actions. Corrective actions are bad. You definitely don't want one, because if you were to get a correction, that means that the agency is so deficient that we're not complying with the rules that apply to MPOs, TPOs. And if we get no corrective actions, that means that the MPO remains eligible for federal and state funding. Next slide, please. So this past year, once again, DOT went through the review process with us, and they noted a bunch of, or they identified a bunch of notable work products that they wanted to take a little bit of time to highlight. Next slide, please. I'll go through these really quickly because you should be familiar with many of them already. The first thing they noted was our data and analytics platform. We have a data platform that we use to evaluate projects within Hillsborough County. We're presented with an opportunity, and we're taking advantage of it to expand it across the entire Tampa Bay area. So we're working with 8 MPOs to expand it across the CCC region, and we have future plans to expand it across the state over to the Orlando Metro. Next slide, please. Another thing that they identified was the Vision Zero Speed Management Action Plan, which was managed by Gena Torres and her team. They noted that it was one of the first studies identifying countermeasures specifically for speed. So this plan was all about addressing the general safety problem of the county and specifically our speed problem on particular corridors. This plan has won awards from the John W. Barr District Transportation Achievement Award. It was also nominated, or sorry, not nominated, it actually won the 2020 Project of the Year from the Tampa Bay Institute of Transportation Engineers, and was a finalist for Transportation Planning Project of the Year at Transplay. Next slide, please. They also noted our Regional Long-Range Transportation Plan, which is an extension of our It's Time Hillsborough Plan. To produce this, we worked with 8 other counties around Tampa Bay and 2 Fdot districts to evaluate 3 transportation scenarios. You all remember this. We set records for engagement, and it serves as a really good example for how to coordinate and produce a regional plan. Next slide, please. And then lastly, the Race Equity Resolution, which was put forward by our Citizens Advisory Committee a few months back. Quite a few months ago, the committee decided to put forward a statement in response to racial tensions hitting kind of like a fever pitch across the country, and to be honest, continuing to today. Our staff worked with them to craft the resolution, and it serves as a commitment for us to hold ourselves accountable for ensuring access to all transportation modes, but particularly when we're talking about minorities and other disenfranchised communities. Next slide, please. Some of the recommendations that Fdot staff provided to us were to evaluate the website for ADA compliance. If you all remember, about a year ago, there was a wave of lawsuits levied against many public agencies for not having resources and documents available in multiple formats. And Fdot has encouraged us to continue exploring ways to make our documents more accessible to folks with disabilities. Second recommendation we received is to clear out and archive some of the older versions of the Unified Planning Work Program on the website so that there's not confusion amongst the public about what projects we're working on at any given time. And then lastly, they asked us to continue listing partially funded projects on our priority list and leave them there until they're fully funded and complete. As we mentioned, or as we discussed earlier this morning, the idea being that we want to leave projects on there so that it signals that there's still community support for these priorities. Next slide, please. We didn't get any corrective actions, no surprise there, woohoo. Next slide, please. So this is an action item, and what we're asking from the board is, based on Fdot's findings that the MPO is in compliance with federal and state laws, to support recertification of the MPO TPO and authorize Chairman Cohen to sign the joint certification statement. Chairman Cohen, I believe that Cheryl has already sent the certification statement to you to review. If that hasn't happened, we will send it immediately after this board meeting. And I think that about wraps it up. Next slide, please. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
I do not see any questions or comments for the
Move
board
approval.
at this time. Commissioner Kemp has moved approval. Commissioner Overman seconded, and just for the record, I do have a copy of the certification statement here to sign once the vote is taken. So with that, can we please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Gena Evans?
Yes.
Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Joe Wagner?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Mayor Lott?
Yes.
Councilman Maniscalco? Jessica Vaughn?
Yes.
Motion carries 13-0 with one non-vote.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And our final action item is the Unified Planning Work Program UPWP Annual Review and Amendment. Jamal Wise and Allison Ye from the TPO staff will present that item.
Morning, everyone. Allison Ye with the TPO staff, and Jamal is online with us as well. The item before you today is the fiscal year 21-22 Unified Planning Work Program Amendment, and I'm also going to give you a quick status report on our current projects. Next slide, please. As many of you know, this is a 2-year work program that became effective July 1st, 2020, and runs to June 30th, 2022. So we're coming to the end of our first fiscal year as of June 30th. And it outlines our major planning tasks, documents our federal and state funding, coordinates our federally funded planning tasks that are performed by the TPO, HART, and DOT, and is one of the documents we need to comply with federal and state rules. Next slide, please. So there's 3 areas we want to present to you today. There's going to be some minor adjustments to the fiscal year 21 and 22 grant budgets, a preview of update status on the planning studies we're including in the UPWP at last May's adoption, and some new project requests, and the status of our disadvantaged business utilization program. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of our current funding for the fiscal year 21-22. Most of our funding comes from federal sources. So the PL or planning grant, the SU, the surface transportation is from Federal Highway. The FTA stands for Federal Transit Administration. So those 3 categories comprise most of our funding, and we get some funding from the Florida Commission for the Transportation Disadvantage, which supports our TD planning program. Overall, our total budget for fiscal year 21 is approximately $2.7 million and $2.4 million for fiscal year 22. And all of this funding is annually allocated next year, please. Next slide, please. So fiscal year 21, budget changes that we're making is that we are moving money into Task 2, about $102,000 for both personnel and consultant expenses. And we're doing that because we're using it to primarily support an increase in the non-discrimination planning. And that's based on, this was mentioned earlier, the board's racial equity resolution for August 2020. We're moving that money, we're not really increasing or decreasing the overall budget, just moving that money from Task 1 management, about $65,000, and Task 3 long-range planning. We didn't use the funds in those categories, so we're just shifting it to Task 2. We're also doing a $2 adjustments to the PL grant to true up some differences in rounding errors. So that that will be part of an agreement that's re-signed. Next slide, please. Okay, as for the fiscal year 22 budget, at the end of each 2-year period, in this case, fiscal year 20, there was a little bit of money left over that becomes available in fiscal year 22. So we are including that money in our fiscal year 22 budget, which starts July 1st this year. Task 1 is going to have $23,021 added, and Task 2 is going to have $158,000 added to the surface transportation planning grant. Also, I mentioned earlier that the grants are allocated annually. So for fiscal year 22 of the state TD grant, we have an increase of $2,081 based on the actual grant award amount. Next slide, please. So now to the status of our current planning studies. These were adopted by the board May 13th, 2020, so that was right before our fiscal year started. And we had a set of projects we call the critical path projects. These are the planning projects that we need to complete as part of our planning process, that we consider them necessary. Just going down the line, the first project was the data platform for performance and monitoring project evaluation. That's ongoing this fiscal year. As well, the data analytics portal and data exploration that Johnny mentioned earlier, that's also going on right now. As the Smart Cities and ITS Master Plan is also in fiscal year 21. In fiscal year 21, we were able to complete traffic counts for Hillsborough County and the city of Tampa, and also start our Transportation Disadvantaged Service Plan update and integration of mobility service as part of that. We continue to support both fiscal years, the USF Department of Urban Planning Fellowship Program. We've had a lot of success with great students from that program. And the Vision Zero implementation reporting is also an ongoing task for us. As well, in fiscal year 21, the Plant City Transit Plan was completed. And finally, we continue to support the planning efforts with the MPO Chairs Coordinating Committee. Next slide, please. Now, the second set of projects is discretionary projects that was voted on by the TPO board in May as well. And I have them listed in order of votes. So the school area safety study will start in fiscal year 22. We are beginning the storm evacuation shelter scenario study, which will run into fiscal year 22. The HART bus stop assessment study is in progress and will also run past July this year. The USF Temple Terrace Trail feasibility study is in progress in fiscal year 21. The freight supply chain and resilience study is pending and will start in fiscal year 22, as well the community health impacts of the long-range plan. We're also in fiscal year 22 working on an electric vehicle facility needs study and a Plant City transportation plan. Finally, the park speed zone study has started in fiscal year 21, so those are all in progress right now. Next slide, please. Along with those projects, we also, this slide just summarizes the discretionary projects that are definitely going forward in fiscal year 22. So we talked about them here: the school safety area study, supply chain and resilience, community health impacts, the electric vehicle charging needs, and Plant City transportation plans. And those are all based on the votes received in last May. Next slide, please. We did receive a number of new requests for planning studies. I'll start with the ones in Tampa on the left. There is a request for a guidance document for designing pedestrian bicycle-friendly bridges, comprehensive school safety study for 5 schools, the speed management program of before and after studies, Vision Zero corridor studies for county roads that are within the city limits, research and best practices report for traffic calming solutions, advanced parking management system feasibility studies, a project prioritization tool, and an innovation speaker series. Along with the Tampa request, we have a request from CAC that's been mentioned already, the I-275 Boulevard Conversion Study. Phase 1 of that study has been requested by CAC, and we have an estimated amount of $150,000. You'll notice that not everything has a cost attached to it. For the ones we definitely know the cost of the study, I have them listed here. Otherwise, those are still being estimated. The TAC requested a low-cost air quality monitoring network project that will be $50,000. Plant City requested a canal connector trail feasibility study, and Temple Terrace requested a mobility fee study that's estimated at around $120,000. Hillsborough County requested a truck route plan update, and the Hillsborough County staff from the Sunshine Line requested a return on investment study. Next slide, please. So staff has some recommendations on the new studies. This is aside from the amendment that's going to be asked for separately. But we are recommending that we continue with the studies that were already approved by the board in May 2020, and to accommodate lower cost requests using from year one studies. So for example, Johnny mentioned earlier that we were able to negotiate regional cost share for the TPO's data platform, and that's enable us to create some funding for some other studies, such as the USF Air Quality Monitoring Network study, the Sunshine Line Return on Investment study, and be able to swap the Plant City Southeast Master Plan with the Canal Connector Trail feasibility study. As far as the other studies you see on the list I showed a moment ago, those will be considered along with the new work program update for fiscal year 23 and 24, and we will be starting that in the fall this year. Next slide, please. Wanted to give you an update on how our disadvantaged business enterprise program is going. So the TPO supports and follows the Department of Transportation's goal of 11% DBE usage. Currently, our DBE usage for this fiscal year is about 12%, and holistically low is the projects that support DBEs, the storm evacuation study, the trail feasibility study, park zone study, traffic counts, and the regional LRTP summary document. Those last two have already been completed. Okay, next slide, please. So the final recommendation we're seeking from the board right now is really for the UPWP amendment. This is aside from the project updates, and we'd like you to approve the changes to the fiscal year budgets and the included resolutions. So the resolutions are really for the TD funding and to update the plan, our planning grant agreement by $2 and to approve the changes that we're making. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Ye. I'm going to call on Commissioner Kemp. I do want to remind everyone it is 3 minutes of 12. Go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Ye, at one point you showed a figure of $158 on the screen, but when you said it, you said $158,000. I'm just wondering which one is accurate.
$158. Our accounting manager was so good that year that she only had $158 left.
It's very good. I was going to suggest something different than what you had listed if you actually had $158,000.
Yeah, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? Do we have a motion to approve?
Move to.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Kemp, seconded by Commissioner Myers, although I did hear a voice from someone over here. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Cohen?
Yes.
Commissioner Kemp?
Yes.
Commissioner Overman?
Yes.
Commissioner Myers?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes.
Mayor Ross?
Yes.
Gena Evans?
Yes.
Melanie Williams?
Yes.
Charles Klug?
Yes.
Joe Wagner?
Yes.
Derek Doughty?
Yes.
Mayor Lott?
Yes.
Councilman Maniscalco? And Jessica Vaughn?
Yes.
And the motion passes 13-0 with one non-vote.
Thank you very much. Ms. Alden.
Thank you, and I want to thank you all for the really fabulous discussions here today. The thoughtfulness that you all bring to the meetings of the TPO it's inspiring, and thank you for being part of this. We had a couple of requests for presentation slides. I wanted to let everyone know and let our audience know that the presentation slides are posted on our website, planhillsboro.org. It's on the calendar, so if you go to the meeting page for this meeting, you'll find the presentation slides there. They are also linked in the board agenda packet, so hopefully they'll be easy to find. We will send your staff the text for the letter on the MUTCD if you care to do anything with that. I also wanted to highlight that our quarterly report is provided in the email to the board members. So that provides more details about the planning studies that Allison briefly mentioned. Our regional meeting of the what's becoming the Suncoast Transportation Planning Alliance that we mentioned earlier. Our next regional meeting date is June 25th, and we'll be having on that date actually 2 meetings. So there'll be a meeting of the Tri-County TMA Leadership Group, and our representatives to that group are Commissioners Kemp and Overman and Councilman Dingfelder, and we also have Mr. Klug and Ms. Evans as alternates, and thank you for participating in that group. That first meeting will be at 9:30 in the morning, followed by a meeting at it's 11 or 11:30, so over lunch, of just the chairs of the MPOs, although everyone is, of course, welcome to stay as it's a public meeting. This will be our first hybrid meeting at the regional level since, first in-person meeting at all since before the pandemic. So it's going to be at Lakewood Ranch Town Hall, organized, hosted, and chaired by the Sarasota Manatee MPO this quarter. So we'll be discussing more about what goes into those regional priority lists next month at our annual public hearing, where we look at how all of our projects fall onto our list of priority projects and identifying which of those are our regional grant candidates. Finally, I wanted to mention some good news. You heard Secretary Gwynn mention the additional funding coming to the state of Florida as a result of the American Rescue Plan. So $10 billion came to Florida, of that $2 billion for transportation. And District 7 has been working very hard to position the West Shore Interchange as a candidate for that funding. Of course, you all sent a letter of support advocating for that back in February. And as you heard also, we're hopeful that the downtown interchange safety improvements will be part of that package. So waiting for the final announcement from the governor about the budget on that. But in addition to that federal package, there was one in December, the COVID Response and Relief Supplemental Act. That provided almost $500 million to Florida DOT for transportation projects. And almost $90 million of that was set aside specifically for MPOs. So that means when you apportion it down to all of the MPOs across the state, possibly about $7 million coming here, and looking at allocating that to projects on our priority list. It would be available in fiscal '23. The preliminary suggestion is that go to the Bush Boulevard safety improvements that we've been working on with District 7 for the last couple of years, and which have been on this board's priority list for a few years. That comes to the end of my report. Any questions?
I don't see any, and for the, excuse me, Commissioner Overman.
Just to remind everyone, the letters that we may or may not send, the comment period, just as a reminder, is May 14th. So it's they need to get out of here as quickly as possible if you're going to do it. So thank you.
All right, well, it is 12:03 p.m. and we are adjourned.
Almost want to take my mask off.
Everybody.